A month ago, the training arena of the academy exploded with screams. The newcomer, who had just transferred, challenged their number one, and everyone decided it was pure madness. On the court, Zhou Wen, the strongest student in all of Guide, stood one-on-one against the stranger. She dryly ordered him to attack, and the boy rushed forward without any ceremony. He sharply threw a punch, but the icy gaze of his opponent did not even flinch. A flash, and a heavy blow to the stomach instantly bent the boy in half. The air was cut by a blurred shadow. The girl spun in a somersault and unleashed a new devastating move. The blow threw Zhou Wen across the entire hall, and he crashed loudly onto the parquet floor. The spectators froze. The fight lasted exactly 1 second. The crowd buzzed, trying to learn the name of the one who had just defeated the academy's best student. That day, Zhou Wen lost for the first time in his life. And from this defeat began his true story. And the very world in which this happened broke down several decades ago. Earth was torn apart by an extraspatial storm, releasing gods, dragons, and other mythical creatures of unprecedented power. Humans found themselves at the very bottom of the food chain, but were given a chance to evolve. For this, they had to kill monsters from other dimensions and take their crystals. Only the quest for such a trophy meant almost certain death. In an ordinary school, an irritated teacher shouted the name of the very Zhou Wen to the whole class, and he carefreely snuffled at his desk, covering his face with a textbook. Once the principal seriously told him that there are only 2 types of geniuses in the world, Zhou Wen and all the others. Suddenly the young man stirred and opened his eyes wide. He jumped up right in the middle of the lesson and declared that he was leaving the stunned teacher doubting the principal's words. The boy rushed headlong down the empty school corridor, and in a moment he was speeding through the city at full speed against the backdrop of a crimson sunset. Zhou Wen's life changed radically as soon as a mysterious phone fell into his hands. For the sake of a game, he completely abandoned his studies, activating the device with a drop of his own blood. A finger pressed the icon, and the space around was suddenly torn apart by a hologram of a mystical forest. The boy silently clenched the phone in his palms and dropped another drop of blood on the display to create a character. The screen exploded with dazzling crimson energy, from which a dark silhouette began to form. Success. The system issued a ready avatar. The boy watched the hero in the dungeon with satisfaction. Skill leveling in the game instantly and absolutely safely strengthened his body in reality. Having received a quest to kill a powerful ant, the avatar rushed headlong into battle. A devastating hail of fiery strikes poured down. In the real world, the academy could only envy. Zhou Wen was considered an absolute genius who was the only one to independently develop spiritual power by the age of 16. The teachers had no doubt that with such strength, he would easily take first place in the upcoming exam, until the very same girl defeated him with a single strike. Later, the teacher looked sadly at Zhou Wen, sleeping at his desk. After Anjing took him down with one hit, the young man completely gave up and now spent whole days just playing. The man sighed resignedly. Meanwhile, Zhou Wen sat carefree under the fence with his phone, smiling and dreaming that his luck would continue. The screen in his hands chimed cheerfully. Another crystal dropped from the fallen monster. The smartphone screen flashed with energy. Zhou Wen absorbed the crystal of the defeated enemy, transferring power from the game directly into his body. The system reminded him of his pathetic stats from a month ago, but now the numbers have noticeably jumped. He wouldn't have achieved this with ordinary meditations, even in several years. The young man smugly cleared his throat, only regretting that game crystals couldn't be extracted into reality and sold profitably. The game was interrupted by a sudden attack. An unknown creature knocked back his avatar with a powerful blow. A new monster flashed fiercely with red eyes on the screen. It was a mighty, mutant ant. Zhou Wen tensed. He would have easily crushed the beast if he had a little time in reserve. But the small creatures were already taking his hero in a tight circle, preparing to crush him by numbers. Suddenly, footsteps were heard very close by. Someone was walking straight towards him across the empty badminton court. The young man sharply looked back and froze, recognizing the red-haired girl. Fan Josie, he thought in horror, begging fate to just let her go about her business. But the girl stopped right above him and declared that she had finally found him, while Zhou Wen feverishly pondered how to hide the phone's secret and not die in the virtual battle. While the boy was wondering in surprise what the local nerd might need from her, the red-haired girl confidently extended her hand to him and suggested teaming up for the final combat exam. The pink-haired girl approached the young man who was sitting right on the playground and directly asked if he was inviting her to join his team. He didn't even look away from his smartphone. He asked lazily about the reason, although he was panicking inwardly because his character in the game was one step from death. She answered seriously that she was aiming for the highest score, and for that, strong partners were absolutely necessary. The boy lowered his head and bitterly asked if she was confusing his present self with who he was just a month ago. But the girl flared up with confidence. For her, Zhou Wen remained himself and was the only worthy opponent in all of Guide. When he asked about An Jing, a strange fact emerged. This mysterious student of inhuman level had suddenly transferred out, as if she appeared at school exclusively for duels with him. Zhou Wen recalled her silhouette confusedly. He had no idea what scores they could have between them if they had never met before. He wearily leaned his head back against the fence mesh. Realizing she had overthought it, the girl returned to business and demanded a final answer regarding the team. The young man barely smiled and calmly agreed to join their group. The plan was ready. She had already found 2 more participants, so ahead for the 4 of them awaited daily training for perfect coordination at the test. As soon as she moved away, Zhou Wen triumphantly shouted. On the screen, his tiny avatar finally defeated the red mutant ant. A rare spatial crystal fell from the monster, but as soon as the hero rushed for the loot, he was instantly devoured by a swarm of new creatures, and the words, "Game over," flashed. The boy heavily leaned his hands on his knees, but did not get disappointed, and decided to calmly check the new stats at home. Zhou Wen looked puzzled at the phone screen, which was glowing crimson from the unstable crystal. A bloody silhouette of an ant appeared on the display. The boy doubted. What legendary skill could be extracted from an insect? A sudden dazzling flash sharply struck his eyes. A status window unfolded before him. A 16-year-old mortal with high strength and spirit stats. His gaze froze on one line. He had just acquired the Titan Fist of the 7th level. In the schoolyard, an acquaintance stunned Zhou Wen with the news. He was becoming the 4th member of their team. Blonde Tian Xiangdong openly doubted. Wen had not trained for a whole month, so for winning the exam, he suggested taking another fighter. Zhou Wen took it calmly. The future and safety of the group depended on the test, so the distrust was justified. However, the girl stubbornly stood her ground. Wen still remains their best option. Tian Xiangdong grunted and suggested resolving the dispute with a quick fitness test. He challenged Wen to a duel. Wen calmly agreed, but immediately warned that he did not want to injure anyone. Tian was not interested in the dry numbers of the school power meter. He demanded a real fight until retreat. The girl shuddered mentally. The initiator possessed thunder techniques, while poor Wen might not have any combat skills at all. The 3rd student tried to stop the clash and use the device, but all eyes were already fixed on Zhou Wen. He smiled awkwardly, scratched the back of his head, and admitted that he was simply afraid of killing Tian with one blow. 3 students stood before the massive power meter in a sunlit room. The boys briefly decided who would strike first, and the turn went to the blonde. The blonde suddenly sprang up and struck the target. From the powerful blow, his body arched, releasing a burst of energy. The others tensely awaited the result. The number 7 flashed on the machine's screen. Zhou Wen only smiled calmly, recalling that he had the same strength even before finding his mysterious phone. The satisfied blonde stepped back and gestured for him to approach the apparatus. Suddenly, the walls of the building nearly shook from a new, much more powerful strike. An elderly man in glasses, who was just walking down the corridor, was surprised by the noise and headed to the room. He cautiously peeked through the door crack and froze. Zhou Wen had just struck the target. A dazzling golden aura enveloped the boy's hand, and his classmates were simply stunned with shock. An absolute 10 exploded on the monitor. The old man behind the door broke out in a cold sweat from the realization. The boy never gave up, and only slept during lessons because of exhausting secret training that made him the unbeatable leader of the school. The pink-haired girl froze in amazement. The young man scored a 10 with the most difficult inch strike, without even using spiritual power. The blonde examiner nervously clenched his teeth. He sharply jabbed his finger at the boy and declared him accepted, but confidently warned that defeating him would not be so easy. The blonde brusquely pushed the opponent out of the way and took his place at the apparatus. While the man in the cloak mentally laughed at how Tian Xiangdong was trembling over his image, the blonde's fist was already sparking with energy. Xiangdong activated the spiritual power skill, sending powerful lightning discharges through his body. With a loud scream, he struck the target, causing a dazzling explosion. The number 11 flashed on the monitor. Breathing heavily, the blonde man smugly asked how his hit was, to which the young man calmly showed a thumbs up. The opponent provoked him, saying that surrendering is not shameful, but the young man silently measured the target with his gaze. The boy asked if the school would charge him money for the broken device, and Shangdong rashly promised to pay for everything. Having received permission, the young man smiled with satisfaction, cracked his knuckles, and released his own aura. Now he could hit at full power. In the laboratory, the arrogant blonde openly mocked Zhou Wen, while an elderly man tensely watched them from behind the door. Suddenly, Zhou Wen delivered a powerful strike, releasing a bright flash of spiritual energy. The force surged from his fist like a wave. The old measuring device could not withstand the insane overload and simply exploded. Thick metal was torn to pieces, showering everything around with sparks. Witnesses froze with open mouths. Zhou Wen calmly lowered his hand among the smoking debris. The former director realized that such a strike required at least the 8th level, and mentally acknowledged the boy as a genius of a completely different scale. Zhou Wen indifferently reminded the blonde about his promise to pay for the damage. He fearfully called him brother and immediately agreed, while the red-haired girl only smiled with interest. The evening sun flooded the city with crimson. On his way home, the boy puzzled over why an elite girl with the legendary class would challenge him, an ordinary, mortal student. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp vibration of the smartphone. He smiled warmly. It was his father, calling to joyfully invite his son to his own wedding. Zhou Wen pressed the receiver to his ear and asked to wait a moment, promising to send him his photo. The father boasted an impressive photo of the future stepmother, O Yan Lan. The wedding ceremony was scheduled in Luoyang in a week. The boy refused to go because of an exam, and abruptly changed the subject to an old metal tin from cookies he found in the closet. The box was empty. Father at the wheel just waved it off. It was an ordinary tin from his childhood. There was a phone inside, the son said, puzzled. The driver accurately described the white body without buttons, and unexpectedly admitted that the item belonged to his grandfather. It turned out that many years ago, the grandfather, a carpenter, with his partners dug up an old well at a night construction site. Mysterious light came from it, but instead of gold inside, there was only a cracked wooden chest. Inside it was this phone. The screen lit up for a second and went out permanently, and no one ever found a charging port. Back then, the workers took it as someone's stupid joke, and the father, in his youth, tried in vain to trade the find for cigarettes before simply throwing it into the box. The boy instantly perked up, realizing the main thing. The device had never been turned on. The conversation ended, but now he had a plan. His exam would take place in the very city where his grandfather found the mysterious well. Walking on the night roof, he mentally scolded himself for forgetting to ask about possible enemies of his father. Already at home, settled on the bed, the young man again thoughtfully stared at the black screen of the strange artifact. In class, Zhou Wen was peacefully dozing at his desk, while the teacher was writing something on the board. 3 students were breathing heavily, running laps on the school stadium. Zhou Wen, on the other hand, was sitting relaxed under the fence and lazily yawning over a tablet. A few days passed. A sharp shout stopped the runners, and the boy with glasses was knocked off his feet. 3 strangers silently loomed over him. The exhausted boy with glasses weakly sank to the floor, and his friend rushed to help him. Suddenly, the corridor was filled with a heavy, oppressive aura. A proud young man in military uniform appeared. He coldly walked past the crowd, leaving behind only frightened whispers. A little later, a familiar blonde from the stadium sheepishly rubbed the back of his head and confessed to Zhou Wen that he would go to the trials with another team. Zhou Wen watched his friend, understanding that after Tian Xiangdong's departure, finding a new team member would not be easy. He asked Li Zi again if he knew that old Tian had left the team. The boy with glasses also refused the joint exam, curtly cutting off all questions about the reasons. In the empty corridor, he was quietly called by name. The girl bowed her head, barely squeezing out an apology, but Zhou Wen calmly stopped her with a hand. He already knew everything. The boy objected. He was the one who should apologize, because they wanted to deal with him, and they just got caught in the crossfire. The boy gently patted her hair and advised her to immediately look for another partner. She warned anxiously that Zhou had crossed someone very influential. He just waved his hand indifferently in farewell and walked down the corridor. The boy was just racking his brain about where to find a reliable person for an important test when Teacher Yu unexpectedly called him. The teacher named the inspector's real name, An Tianzhuo, and asked again if he really didn't know him. Zhou Wen firmly assured that he did not. In the office, the teacher asked puzzledly how an ordinary high school student could have angered Inspector Commander An. Zhou Wen had no idea who that even was. It turned out that he was a young but extremely powerful military official of the Eastern Zone from a noble family. The teacher explained, a single critical phrase from the commander was enough for the local sycophants to be ready to do anything to destroy the student. Zhou Wen was outraged by such irresponsibility and suspected that the official was somehow connected to An Jing. But Yu ordered to postpone the investigation. There were only 2 days left until the end of registration, and there was no time to delay. Clouds were gathering, and the boy understood that this time he could not rely on ordinary students. The elderly teacher Yu proposed the only way out, to join the team of a certain Li Xuan and help him achieve the highest score, completely giving up his own leadership. When asked whether he would have to work exclusively for someone else's interest, the teacher coldly replied, "This is definitely better than losing access to the inspection altogether." There was no choice, so the boy asked to arrange a meeting for them. After leaving the building, he called his father and asked about some An Tianzuo, to which he unexpectedly heard, "How do you know about your older brother?" The boy froze in shock, while his father casually talked about his upcoming wedding, because of which he would suddenly have a stepbrother and stepsister. The father's call stunned him. He was getting married, and now the boy would have a stepbrother Tianzuo and stepsister An Jing. The confused boy questioned his father over the phone why the new relatives treated him that way. On the way home, he bitterly resented his own weakness. Because of one word from Tianzuo, he almost failed the exam, and the powerful An Jing would have completely crushed him in a fight. The boy returned to his empty, cluttered apartment. Falling onto the bed, he farmed mutant ants in the game for hours. Although after the first skill crystal, valuable loot no longer dropped. Suddenly, a golden egg of the pet lit up above the corpse of the last monster. He froze in amazement, as such companions were given exclusively to players of the legendary class, not ordinary mortals. At that moment, the virtual egg exploded with light and struck his avatar with a crimson lightning bolt. In reality, the boy broke out in a cold sweat, and a foreign whisper that swore loyalty unto death pierced his mind. He screamed madly in pain, which tore his consciousness apart. His strength vanished, and he collapsed onto the bed helplessly. In the silence, he suddenly shuddered, sharply opened his eyes, and gasped convulsively. The boy sat up heavily on the bed, clutching his split head with his hands. On the back of his palm, a crimson mark suddenly flared up. He stared at the phone in surprise. His pet companion had finally hatched. The interface displayed the statistics of the mighty mutant ant, high strength indicators and a special glove form. He approached the window and pulled back the curtain, pondering how it works. The boy froze in the middle of the living room, wondering how the draft works, then simply closed his eyes and focused. At that moment, his right hand was enveloped by whirlwinds of red energy. A flash, and the palm turned into a massive armored gauntlet with spikes, meant to multiply his strength many times over. He barely restrained the urge to strike, so as not to accidentally destroy his own apartment. Suddenly, the crimson energy broke free from the armor, drawing a massive dark silhouette in the air. With a predatory hiss, a gigantic ant with burning eyes and huge blades instead of legs rose before him. The young man tensed slightly, because in the game this monster looked not so scary, but instantly got excited by the idea of riding it. The next evening, watching the city lights, he remembered Li Xuan, who, although fond of showiness, turned out to be a decent person. Teacher Yu, behind the wheel of the car, advised to think exclusively about the upcoming exam, to which the boy calmly replied that he was fully in control of the situation. The car stopped in front of a large neon sign reading Imperial Health Club. Zhou Wen entered the luxurious hall, searching for the other young master Li. Heavy basses struck from behind the walls, stepped beyond the threshold. Together with the bald man, the boy found himself in a spacious hall where music thundered and a loud party was ongoing. Teacher Yu led him to the sofa and introduced Zhou Wen as a very useful assistant for the upcoming exam. Blue-haired Li Xuan, not letting go of the girl's embraces, waved off lazily. He fully trusted the teacher and did not doubt a good grade. Having finished the matter, Yu decided to return to school. At the end, he ordered Zhou Wen to stay to get to know the new partner better before the combat skills test. The heavy door slammed loudly shut. Li Xuan lazily glanced at the guest, recalling rumors about the strongest genius from guide school. Zhou Wen calmly advised not to believe these rumors. The rich kid sarcastically agreed. A true genius definitely would not lose to An Jing with a single strike. He ordered Zhou Wen to just stay silent and not interfere during the exam, to which the boy indifferently sat on the sofa and took out his phone. Then Li Xuan pointed to the table covered with alcohol and proposed a game. If the guest drinks a whole bottle of wine, he can choose any girl from the room. The young man dryly refused the drink, not taking his eyes off the smartphone screen. The blue-haired boy nearby mentally despised him, considering him a weakling for whom their teacher had to humiliate himself in vain. The blue-haired boy whispered something into the red-haired girl's ear, and she laughed, reproaching him for being spoiled. Meanwhile, a seductive red-haired beauty appeared nearby. She playfully leaned in, asking about his game. The girl sat down close, hinting at her own attractiveness, but he did not even blink. All his thoughts were occupied by the silver-winged ant on the screen, so he missed the direct offer to do something more pleasant. The beauty openly cuddled up to him, while the gamer nervously complained about the crazy speed of his virtual enemy. Losing patience, she irritably grabbed his face, demanding attention. The young man screamed in fear as this movement put him one step away from defeat. Slap! With one hard hit, he simply threw the girl away from himself. She shockingly sank onto the carpet, and he fiercely thundered at her, still not releasing the phone from his hands. Seeing this wild scene, the blue-haired boy almost choked on his drink, and in a moment, he burst out laughing at the top of his voice. The inscription, "Game Over," mercilessly hung over the fallen game avatar. The boy stared confusedly at the screen, quietly sighing that his character was dead. This defeat was already being observed. The young man in white uniform smiled smugly, mentally noting that this player amused him greatly. A thick night fog hung over the elite residential complex. On the table in the apartment remained traces of yesterday's party. Spilled Irish whiskey, dirty glasses, and scattered rose petals. In bed next to the girl, the blue-haired boy was sleeping soundly. Suddenly, he lazily opened his eyes. Meanwhile, on the tablet screen, the virtual avatar desperately swung a sword at a giant red ant. One missed bloody slash, and the battle was over. The dark-haired player stared irritably at the inscription, "Game Over." He had spent the whole night killing this monster, but still couldn't land a single proper hit. The young man thoughtfully rubbed his chin, realizing that gaming skill requires too much time to wind up. So the only chance was to adapt his real signature inch punch to it. He decisively rose from the couch and took a fighting stance, deciding to test the theory. If he sharpens the movement in reality, the game system should automatically synchronize it. A sharp lunge, and the fist sliced through the air with a whistle. Through the ajar door, the blue-haired one silently observed the night training, immediately noticing a bunch of mistakes in the stance and an excessively wide amplitude. The blue-haired one mentally wondered why he was even training at all, and noted that his wind-up was too wide. And I already thought he was hiding some talent. The boy stretched disappointedly and listlessly shuffled off to get more sleep. Under the giant planet in the sky, the entrance exams began. The classroom was silent, while everyone focused on writing answers on the sheets. He finished quickly and was now openly bored, propping his head with his hand. Students crowded near the university, saying goodbye to their relatives before departure. A few days later, the bus took them to the next trial. From the bus window, the young man was examining the old city of Gede, which had grown here after the spatial storm. Ancient city walls were passing by outside the window, around which all nature was mutating due to the influence of other dimensions. The territory was strictly guarded by the military, as it was here that they awaited a test of combat skills. He raised his gaze to the massive stone gate. Everything was just beginning. An armed convoy guard was watching the stop, while passengers were getting off the bus into the mountain wilderness. Armed soldiers were patrolling the square in front of the ancient gate, where newcomers were being brought. The young man in the blue jacket stopped in the middle of the camp. Li Xuan and the others had not yet arrived, so he would have to wait. Before him towered the massive gate of the ancient fortress. He relaxedly hid his hands in his pockets, looking around at the people nearby. His gaze caught on a dark sign on the wall. Next to the hieroglyphs was a strange palm print. The boy frowned in confusion. Suddenly his pocket vibrated sharply. He froze in surprise, thinking it was his father calling. But he pulled out the same mysterious phone from his pocket, the one controlled by the man of blood. The device never vibrated and had no call function, but now a camera icon was pulsating on the screen. The young man stood still, amazed at how he had not noticed it before. He hesitantly twisted the gadget, wondering if the system required him to take a selfie. Finally, he raised the phone and aimed the lens at the mountain landscape. He tried to photograph the sky, but the camera button did not respond. Suddenly, the lens caught hieroglyphs on a sign, and the phone beeped loudly. The boy froze in surprise, watching as the scanner read the gate of the old fortress. A loading screen appeared, and a crazy thought flashed through his mind. He tensed up. The real place had just become a game dungeon, with 2 locations to choose from. Losing nothing anyway, he decided to take the risk. A drop of blood from his finger fell right onto the display. A dazzling explosion of red energy tore the space around. It worked. The hero was transported into the game, turning into a tiny avatar in front of the fortress entrance. His double cautiously moved through the empty digital streets. The boy controlled him in awe through the screen, when suddenly a loud clatter sounded from the darkness. The path was blocked by a skeleton soldier with a terrifying blue flame inside. The monster screamed wildly and rushed forward, striking with a mace. He calmly analyzed the fight through the tablet. Although it was the first outing, the local skeletons turned out to be quite weak. His fiery spirit surged forward, as smashing these bones was much easier than ant armor. A furious swing. A devastating blow shattered the monster into tiny fragments. Among the fragments, a shining blue crystal flashed. The small warrior froze in surprise at the find. The boy could not believe his own eyes. A rare skill crystal dropped from the very first enemy. Without hesitation, his finger pressed the screen. A bright blue energy instantly pierced the body. This time it went without hellish pain, and the system quietly recorded a new skill, Skeleton Touch. The skill turned out to be low level, but it barely consumed spiritual energy. To test it in a real fight, he decided to move deeper and activated a new summon. In a flash of light, a mighty mutant ant emerged, which was immediately proudly mounted by his pocket fighter. With a desperate scream, the small one rushed forward. The small skeletons with blue flames in their jaws only turned around in surprise. A powerful discharge of purple lightning instantly shattered them to bones. Residual energy struck directly at the roof of the temple. Meanwhile, nearby, a young man in a blue jacket irritably looked at the screen, muttering that he had gained nothing on the entire journey except for one crystal. Suddenly, a bright flash made him raise his eyes. Ahead, the boy was cutting down an entire army of the undead. Then from the crowd emerged a leader riding a bony monster. Shrouded in a red aura, the skeleton knight reared up right above the boy. The strike was lightning fast. A giant blade swung and cut into the boy, forcefully throwing him away. The screen flashed the merciless message, "Game over." The young man silently looked at the device, then sighed wearily, resigning himself to defeat. Hiding his hands in his pockets, he turned and walked toward the massive stone gates. Above the dark arch, a green sign glowed dimly. He frowned seriously. It would be better to avoid such a powerful opponent in the upcoming exam. The young man stopped in front of the huge stone gate, unaware of the stranger's gaze on his back. "Anjing," a female voice cut through the silence, making the boy sharply turn around. A girl was already confidently walking towards him, piercing her target with her cold, piercing gaze. A man's hand tightly gripped a black flash drive. Zhou Wen calmly stood outside, waiting for the meeting. Suddenly, a fist in a white glove was sharply thrown right into his face. The boy barely managed to pull back. It was the blue-haired An Jing. The girl handed him the flash drive and informed him that it was a transmission from his father. She dryly dropped the carrier into his open palm. Turning away, the girl disdainfully said that the father tried in vain, as there was no point in helping those who chose to degrade themselves. The girl silently turned around and walked away, leaving him alone in the middle of the square. "And one more thing," coldly sounded in the silence. Anjing forbade him over her shoulder to even mention that he had any connection to her family. Her gaze became merciless when she cut off that there was no place for incompetence and weaklings among them. Zhou Wen only wondered in his mind why on earth she had even counted him into her family. But his thoughts were interrupted by a loud shout. The boy sharply turned around and saw 3 strangers. They confidently moved straight towards him. The leader in bright glasses immediately threw his arm over his shoulder in a bossy manner and cheerfully assured him, since old Yu had vouched for him, all problems were solved. The boy in the colorful shirt bossily threw his arm over Zhou Wen's shoulder and suggested not to stress, let others earn the points. Meanwhile, the blonde youth boldly assured his sullen partner that in this dump he would take first place even on his own. The leader in glasses indulgently interrupted his boasting. That was enough to knock the pride out of them. The sullen one instantly straightened up and swore not to allow a single mistake. Zhou Wen silently concluded these 2 were only convenient tools for the leader, whom he did not even plan to introduce. Suddenly, the loudspeaker above the fortress ordered all participants to approach their examiners. By the stone gate, the armed guards were already standing still. 2 girls hurriedly headed to the gathering. Running past, one of them joyfully called out to Zhou Wen. The boy calmly acknowledged her with a thumbs up. The girl smiled warmly, urging him to give his all as well. A sudden rumble drowned out the voices. The massive fortress doors swung open, releasing pillars of dazzling light. A gigantic spatial portal vortex sparkled in the passage. Against its backdrop, the examiner appeared and dryly announced the exam's essence. The final score would depend solely on the number of crystals knocked out from dead skeleton soldiers. A final wish of success was heard, and someone's hand pointed to the swirling vortex of the portal. The young man in the blue cloak stepped without hesitation into the shining abyss. The silhouettes of the travelers passed through the light and dissolved into the thick fog. The boy looked around gloomily, fully understanding that this bizarre dimension was born from the very same catastrophe. Suddenly, he froze in amazement. From the haze before him emerged a gigantic, impregnable wall. The whole group stepped out of the portal, onto a wide square of a mysterious ancient city, immersed in ghostly silence. Bony fingers tightly gripped the weapon, and in the darkness, a green flame flared eerily. With a wild roar, the monster lunged forward, forcing the frightened people to flee in panic. But the boy in the black cap did not retreat, and harshly met the enemy with a strike of violet energy. A powerful flash instantly shattered the corpse into pieces. Another skeleton with a fierce roar attacked another hunter. He only smiled confidently, and with one elusive movement knocked the creature's head off. The skull rolled across the stone floor and stopped at the feet of the youth in the blue hood, who calmly stated that there was nothing to worry about. He relaxedly hid his hands in his pockets. While others were having fun, he just got time to test one theory. The youth took out his phone, catching the irritated glance of his partner in glasses. The latter, frankly, did not understand if there was anything special about this weirdo, since he was just standing aside with a screen in his hands. And the young man suddenly froze. His virtual map began to perfectly overlay the real landscape around. The location of the city gates and every building matched the dungeon drawings in his game to the millimeter. A puzzle formed in his head. If all dungeons have real prototypes, then that terrible skeleton rider from Visions also exists in reality. The radar glowed with red dots. The main target was still far away. Zhou Wen lowered the device and silently weighed whether it was worth going deeper. Hearing the plan to advance deeper into the territory, one of the boys gasped in amazement. The streets were emptying. Skeletons here almost stopped appearing. Li Xuan was eager to move forward for the highest score, although Zhou Wen discouraged him from such a risk. The blonde confidently advised him to stay put if he was scared. He argued that with a detailed map, the transition to the buffer zone would be safe and bring them first place. He was supported by the boy in the striped shirt, fully relying on the protection of stronger comrades. Zhou Wen nervously wiped sweat. He could not directly say that a deadly monster awaited them ahead. A hand went to the pocket with the phone. There remained a faint hope to defeat the creature through the game. The young man abruptly sprang up, deciding in the worst case just to grab his comrade and run. Two fighters raced down the street, escaping from giant skeletons with green flames. A sharp turn. One knocked down a corpse with his foot, and the other pierced it through, carving out purple lightning. Past them, ignoring the fight, calmly walked a young man with a tablet. On the screen, his game hero was just cutting in half a black silhouette with red eyes. The boy irritably bit his finger, because no jumps saved from instant deadly attacks. Suddenly it dawned on him. The boss does not maintain high speed constantly, but only accelerates before a piercing strike. The young man muttered that such a creature could easily take down the whole team, and did not notice the real skeleton right behind his back. A crack, and the monster shattered into bones, dropping a red spatial crystal onto the cobblestones. The fighter in the brown jacket quickly grabbed the loot. He joyfully called his brother Xuan, raising a stone up. Xuan, a young man in a colorful shirt, smiled and bumped fists with him for a good job. Someone from the team noticed that they had already scored enough points, and it was time to return. The red-haired one carelessly waved off. There was no need to hurry, and no need to stress at all. His partner in the black hat cynically remarked that it was better to kill a few more monsters just to be safe. Li Xuan looked at his phone and suggested moving on, since the radar showed no serious threats nearby. Suddenly, someone's hand firmly gripped his wrist. Li Xuan, do you believe in the sixth sense? It was Zhou Wen. He looked tensely at his comrade, not letting go of his hand. Li Xuan frowned in confusion. He said that since childhood, he had felt the approach of danger, and his sense had never failed him. Zhou Wen placed his palm on his chest, confessing that right now, the feeling of danger was incredibly strong. The red-haired one openly mocked him. Brother Xuan took you for the sake of reputation, and now you are dragging the team down with your fabrications. He aggressively jabbed Zhou Wen with his finger, shouting that there were already enough points, so going beyond the safe zone was pure suicide. Zhou Wen calmly endured this outburst, while Li Xuan thoughtfully gazed into the empty alleys of the old town. Xuan rubbed his chin, acknowledging Zhou Wen's correctness, but did not have time to finish speaking. A green blade suddenly flashed from the side. Li Xuan's eyes widened in shock. The same silent partner in the hat suddenly attacked him with a shining dagger. "Jiang Hao, is that you?" The blonde shouted frantically as the merciless green blade pierced through the young man's body before him. A terrifying figure with glowing eyes grew over the boy fallen to the ground, silently ordering not to interfere. Blue-haired Zhuan staggered from the deep wound in his back, exhaling in surprise that he had not expected this at all. Suddenly, the torn flesh pulsed and began to rapidly heal. Despite the pain, the young man crookedly smiled over his shoulder and asked if the second brother had sent the killer. The attacker gripped the dagger in shock. He could not have imagined that the spoiled younger Zhuan had secretly mastered the skill of natural invulnerability. Unlike the gifts of spatial monsters, human strength worked differently. Shining phantoms of beasts snarled in the darkness. People themselves invented cultivation, their own system of spiritual elevation. Each method had its limit, but this path guaranteed absolute invulnerability of the body. A rare technique allowed skipping lower ranks and immediately reaching the epic class. The dark-haired boy nervously swallowed, recalling the main rule: lose your virginity, and all your efforts will go to waste. He imagined Li Xuan in the arms of girls and mentally laughed, for this boy was definitely not capable of such asceticism. Suddenly, a cry rang out from a wounded youth who desperately cursed Jiang Hao for betrayal and conspiracy against Xuan's brother. The traitor with a dagger coldly cut off that two tigers cannot share one mountain. Li Xuan stood opposite and calmly explained that he did not seek power, but the killer only sneered at his naivety. Jiang Hao roared that now it was too late and swung a shining green blade. Xuan did not even blink. Deadly energy split the earth, but he simply strode forward, tearing through the attack on the move. Witnesses of the battle froze as a dazzling flash of lightning illuminated the space. Right before them, the very same legendary technique was awakening. With a rumble, the aura of the enormous explosive serpent materialized. Under its cover stood a man with burning eyes and a poisonous green blade clenched in his hand. The boy next to him screamed in shock. An ordinary mortal simply could not tame a beast of legendary level. The blue-haired youth calmly revealed the secret. The previous owner had handed it over voluntarily, having endured hellish torments. The enemy grinned predatory and moved forward, duly appreciating the boy's insight. With a shout of, "You must die," he rushed into the attack, unleashing a devastating green slash on the youth. He did not even flinch. A shower of sparks, a bare hand firmly caught the deadly blade. The attacker was stunned. The youth's silhouette was engulfed by black lightning, and demonic eyes flashed in the shadow. Space was cleaved by a sharp flash of a bloody hieroglyph. A colossal explosion of red energy burst from beneath the earth. The shockwave hurled the enemy far backward. Breathing heavily, he grimaced. He had not expected at all that the opponent would also release a companion of legendary level. From the bloody fog emerged a dark silhouette, mockingly saying that the honorable Mr. Zhuan also hides dirty secrets, but he was sharply interrupted. "I am not like you." The warrior clad in black armor unleashed a turbulent red aura, and with metal in his voice, added that he would never resort to such terrible methods. The dark knight, with blood-red eyes, menacingly loomed over the opponent. The young man nervously clenched the green blade and leaned back. Panic took over. He sprang from his place and fled. The armored monster disdainfully threw after him. Running away, with a sharp swing, he tore after him, roaring that he would not let his victim go just like that. Meanwhile, a boy in a blue jacket rushed out onto the street, shouting desperately at Li Xuan to stop. He swore, watching the inevitable with horror. The footsteps abruptly stopped. Too late. Behind, his wounded partner ran up and shouted, demanding not to stand like a statue, but to immediately save brother Xuan. The boy calmly turned around and offered him to go first. He twisted with anger, spitting out accusations of miserable cowardice. Holding his chest, he ran away and shouted at the end that Xuan had worried about him for nothing. The young man stayed in place, soberly realizing, Li Xuan and Jiang Hao have legendary companions, and without such strength, he still could not help. In the crimson haze, a huge predatory silhouette with burning eyes emerged. An armed skeleton knight, wrapped in blue flames, came out to meet him. Fighting this monster meant certain death. The young man nervously bit his finger to the blood, hesitating whether to help Xuan. Meanwhile, the little one stood in the center of a pillar of red energy, understanding that he must find the general's weak spot. He found himself in a square before 3 skeleton soldiers, and one of them instantly reacted to the victim with a wild roar. The undead suddenly rushed into attack. The young man clenched his teeth. Running away was pointless. The first enemy strike would turn him into a corpse. Xuan barely managed to roll over when a heavy blade shattered the stone where he had been. The next moment the enemy struck crosswise, but the boy skillfully dived under the weapon. The ground shattered into pieces from a new devastating blow. The young man sharply activated his smartphone. Xuan miraculously dodged a whole hail of rapid attacks, which finally confirmed the elder's suspicion. Determination flashed in the young man's eyes, and the space was torn by a harsh order to destroy the violators. At that very moment, the square was covered by a colossal explosion of bloody energy, sweeping everything around. The boy sharply cursed upon seeing on the screen that the clash had already begun. There was no choice left. It was time to act. Assessing the power of the enemy general, he calculated the perfect spot for a strike in the blind zone, right next to his horse. Clinging to this chance for victory, he sprang from his place and rushed swiftly down the empty street. Li Xuan silently walked through the ruins of the broken courtyard. Traces of a recent battle were visible everywhere. He broke into a run, feeling that everyone was already close. At the end of the street, familiar silhouettes finally appeared. He ran up to Zhou Wen and his companion clad in metal armor, asking, on the move, if everything was all right and why they were delayed. The knight flashed red eyes and grimly admitted that things were bad. Their path was blocked by a giant bone rider, wrapped in blue flames. Li Xuan turned pale. Before them stood a true skeleton general. The terrifying undead, with a burning core, looked many times more dangerous than its game counterpart. Right next to the monster, tightly gripping a dagger, Jiang Hao stood unflinchingly. Li Xuan could not understand why the undead ignored the boy until he took a closer look at the bizarre, eye-shaped armor on his shoulder. Realizing that this was the effect of another legendary companion, he only sighed mentally at the privileges of the rich. The tension was broken by the knight's sharp voice, who warned Li Xuan. It seemed his brother was determined to bury him right here. The general's blue eyes fiercely flared upon noticing the strangers. With the thunder of hooves and a roar about destroying the intruders, the monster launched into a furious attack. The knight barked at Li Xuan to retreat and unleashed a dazzling strike of red energy towards the undead. Li Xuan, in massive armor, barely managed to raise his shield, blocking the devastating blow. A deafening explosion tore through the space, with blood-red flashes. The blue-haired youth barely stood on his feet, shielding himself from the hurricane wave. One of the fighters was thrown far back by the force of the blast. The wounded blonde boy coughed up blood, but grabbed his wound and weakly assured that he would live. Meanwhile, armored Li Xuan was fending off fierce attacks from the dead rider, amid desperate cries for help. Suddenly, acid green energy crashed into his defense at full speed. The knight was not frightened at all, only coldly remarked that the enemy had finally dared to act. From the cloud of smoke, Jiang Hao slowly emerged, behind whom a gigantic snake menacingly coiled. Grinning ominously, he threw down the gauntlet, eager to test how long the knight would last against the two of them. The next moment they clashed in a frontal attack, slicing through the air with red and green auras. The blade struck the armor with a deafening crack and a shower of sparks. The blue-haired one clenched his teeth. He clearly understood that in such a meat grinder, Li Xuan would definitely perish. Taking a step forward, the young man called to his comrade, who was taking on the monster, and asked how much time was needed to destroy Jiang Hao. Sparks flew from the powerful crossing of swords, and the knight clad in dark armor suddenly measured exactly 2 minutes for his opponent. A predatory light flashed from beneath the helmet. He had no doubt that this time would be more than enough. A half-naked giant nearby grinned maliciously. A miserable mortal had signed his own death sentence by challenging the skeleton general. "All right!" The wave of blue fabric cut through the air loudly. The young man in a white shirt calmly shrugged off his jacket. The next moment he dashed into attack like lightning, and boldly declared that he himself was giving the enemy those 2 minutes. The boy dodged the blow and boldly beckoned the enemy with his finger. The undead knight stepped forward heavily. He stood unflinchingly before the gigantic armored centaur. The monster swung, unleashing blood-red energy. A moment, and the boy jumped back from the destructive wave. Almost no different from the game, he smiled confidently. Suddenly, Massive hooves nearly crushed him. The enemy's weapon thundered into the stone right between his legs. A muffled laugh of the enemy rolled over the shattered stones. The next sharp strike nearly cut the boy in half. He quickly leaned back, avoiding the wide swing. The illusion dissipated. In the game, the boss's attacks were formulaic, but this real general turned out to be much more agile. The boy scraped his hand on the ground, catching his balance for a new dash. Giant skeleton knight flared with blue flame, looming over the battlefield. The young man in a white shirt barely dodged the devastating red slash. He instantly threw a fist wrapped in golden light forward. The air trembled as the boy sent a wave of energy right under the hooves of the bone horse. The monster growled dully, and the youth tensed. There was not a single scratch left on the enemy's armor. From afar, another warrior watched the battle tensely. He clenched his teeth, impressed that the boy was holding back the general, even without a companion pet. Meanwhile, the fighter with a green tattoo on his chest took the charge of the Black Knight on his energy shield. He sharply jumped back, dodging the dark whirlwind. The red whirlwind threw the fighter back, and he spun in the air. The souls scraped the stones with a screech. The fighter snarled fiercely and roared to attack, challenging, "Who will die first, him or that scoundrel Joe Wen?" The Black Knight rushed forward with a barrage of blood-red attacks, firmly deciding not to allow a two-front battle anymore. But the tattooed man only laughed wildly, taking the deadly blows directly on his bare arms. The pupil sharply narrowed. Crimson blades tore through the strange armor on the blond man's chest with a crunch, and he spat out a clot of blood. Grabbing the green blade, he threw his trump card into the fight: the explosive scaled snake. Behind him, a gigantic phantom reptile immediately grew. The opponent only snorted, deciphering this desperate attempt to buy time. A red eye flashed fiercely from under the helmet. The shadow sharply loomed over Joe Wen. The enemy decided to finish off the persistent boy with a single strike. The terrifying skeleton swung a bloody scythe down on him with great force. Joe Wen bent his body backward with an incredible arch, miraculously dodging the deadly blade just above his head. Immediately, his hand blazed with thick flames. He spotted a weak spot. The fiery fist flew into the enemy's chest. It turned out that the boy also hit his own pet companion. A blue flash, and the Phantom Knight pierced the opponent through with a spear. The target was destroyed. A giant white snake roared in pain as a sudden strike cut through its body. Green slime and pieces of shell rumbled down onto the stone floor. In a moment, the formidable monster shrank to a tiny lizard, which squeaked fearfully and plaintively. A heavy forged boot mercilessly crushed it into a bloody puddle. The Dark Knight coldly said that the enemy was to blame himself, and suddenly blue flames burst from under his feet. The fire rapidly engulfed the armor, releasing a phantom skull with a burning red eye. The young man tensed, realizing that now this armored monster had completely gone mad. The enemy straightened up, completely wrapped in a wave of destructive blue aura. He sprang from his place, slashing the air with deadly swings. The space was torn by a massive blood-red strike. Seeing this insane speed, the boy clenched his teeth. Dodging was impossible. Then, instead of retreating, he sharply plunged forward, sliding right under the very blade, straight to the enemy. And with a swing, he drove a fist burning with energy straight into the dark face of the knight. The young man realized. The knight in black armor had almost exhausted his limit. The skeleton rider, wrapped in blue flame, rushed forward swiftly. The boy rushed to distract the monster, and shouted to the armored ally to look for a chance for a deadly strike. The flaming skull charged into attack with a sinister roar. The Dark Knight struck forcefully with a crosswise blow, striking sparks from the blade. He growled for him to hurry up. The sword cracked under the insane pressure, threatening death to them all. While the knight held back the onslaught, the boy slipped past, and at the edge ignited his fist with fire magic. He burst into a swift dash. The blazing trail cut through space. A dazzling pillar of flame covered the enemy. The epicenter was torn apart by a powerful explosion, throwing pieces of earth upwards. The battlefield was shrouded in a thick cloud of smoke. When the dust settled, the skeleton stood completely unharmed, and only mockingly wheezed that it was not even a scratch. The young man nervously wiped the sweat, not believing his own eyes. He was sure that this strike would work. The knight's skeleton, blazing with blue flame, rushed forward. With a roar, he clashed with the Dark Knight, sparking a shower of sparks. The young man instantly jumped up and unleashed a barrage of fiery fists on the skeleton. The fire engulfed the target, but the Dark Knight gritted his teeth. After all their attacks, the enemy had not a single scratch. The young man's eyes flared. he suddenly remembered the crack. A powerful blow threw the skeleton high above the rooftops. A crack was indeed spreading across his skull, and the Dark Knight understood everything. "Then let's take the risk," the young man shouted, springing from his place. The Dark Knight powerfully raised his hand for the decisive strike. His black blade flashed and cut into the skeleton. The enemy froze helplessly. "Now!" the young man roared, and smashing the floor, leapt upward. Like a blazing meteorite, he pierced through space. His devastating blow flew straight into the vulnerable spot, tearing the skeleton apart in a dazzling flash of fire. He put all his strength into his fist and struck the monster's skull with a blazing hit. The bone cracked loudly. A deafening explosion tore the enemy to pieces in a dazzling flash. Breathing heavily, the boy grinned fiercely and triumphantly exhaled. Succeeded. The remains of the Bone Knight slowly crumbled to ashes. When the smoke cleared, only a shining egg remained on the ground. The boy sat down confusedly nearby. He carefully picked up the warm trophy with the fiery pattern. Suddenly, a blue-haired youth loomed over him, noting in amazement what luck it was to find an egg with a companion. The hero sharply looked around. He waved it off, let him keep it, because without him, they both would already be dead. The blue-haired youth casually threw on a jacket and advised to accept it as thanks for a successfully resolved matter. Then the youth smiled contentedly and replied that he would gladly take the fine. But the companion immediately warned, "Right now the boy is only a mortal, so he won't be able to summon a beast of legendary level. So the egg must be treated with extreme responsibility." Zhou Wen looked with surprise at the shining, fiery egg just obtained in battle. Li Xuan stared confusedly at the gigantic demonic hand. He could not understand how his comrade had acquired such a companion, as he himself barely controlled his own mighty knight. Suddenly, a wild guess flashed through his mind. The egg belonged to the weakest mortal class, whose creatures were usually worthless against legendary monsters. However, the paradox was that it was much harder for a weak creature to form an egg. Realizing the rarity of the find, Li Xuan called his friend a terrible lucky man in amazement. When asked what to do with the bloodied corpse of Jiang Hao, he just waved it off. He had asked for it himself. Li Xuan carefreely scratched his ear and promised to take all the problems of the murder upon himself. Zhou Wen silently accepted this. Satisfied, Li Xuan friendly threw his arm over his shoulder and guaranteed admission to any university after returning. Together, they lifted the wounded student and stepped into the whirlpool of the blue portal. At the exit, under the rays of the evening sun, the curator, in a strict suit, was already waiting for them. Li Xuan cheerfully waved goodbye and headed to his armored SUV, and Zhou Wen returned home by a regular scheduled bus, thoughtfully gazing into the evening sky. The bus stopped at the night stop, while the boy wondered if he had started anemia from blood loss. He went outside, trembling from the cold, and wondering if goji berries would save him. Suddenly his foot caught on something. On the ground groaned a gray-haired man in a blood-stained white coat. A corpse! The young man was horrified. The body coughed hoarsely, still alive. With one movement, the old man suddenly sat up. The old man assured that he was fine. Just an old illness had flared up, and the young man prepared to leave. The boy stepped back a step, looking around warily. The old man smiled broadly and called their meeting the will of fate, suggesting they talk. The young man tried to make an excuse, but the old man ignored it and decided to just ask a few questions. The next moment, the old man was seized by a severe coughing fit. The boy only sighed wearily and allowed questions to be asked. The old man's eyes gleamed slyly. He raised his thumb and asked which girls he liked, with big or small breasts, instantly breaking the interlocutor's mind. In his imagination, two attractive girls appeared, looking at him expectantly. The boy tiredly rubbed the back of his head and cut in that he preferred modest forms. The gray-haired man burst into loud laughter and nodded joyfully. He explained expertly that large volumes only hinder maintaining balance in a fight, and only inexperienced youths dream of them. The next question hit him head-on: a gentle cutie or a daring and sharp-tongued one? The young man groaned mentally. Of course a cutie, but if he kept agreeing with the old man, this chatter would never end, and he so wanted to go home. He put on a serious look and firmly chose the daring one. Silence hung for a few seconds. Then the old man's eyes flashed red, and he shouted that they were true soulmates. The boy resignedly covered his face with his hand, listening to enthusiastic tirades about his unusually deep understanding of women, although he knew perfectly well that such a daring younger sister would simply beat him up immediately. The old man contentedly showed a thumbs up, praising his outstanding taste. Extremely exhausted by this interrogation, the young man only asked where to take the man. The old man continued to insist, To conquer girls, you need a strong body, and with such meager energy, this guy has no chance. The young man only sighed inwardly. The old man was not listening to him at all. Suddenly, the stranger handed him a thin notebook, offering to improve his spiritual power. The boy was stunned. The old man blushed deeply, and with a laugh revealed his trump card. This technique will guaranteedly make any problematic woman obedient. The young man nervously scratched the back of his head and tried to refuse, citing that he was already training by another method. The old man's smile instantly became predatory. He disdainfully cut off that the boy's meditation through suffering was a trifle. Then he proudly declared that his treatise of the heavenly demon far surpasses this technique. The boy tensed sharply. How does the first passerby know the name of his secret method? The old man relaxed, leaned back on the bench, and replied that the boy immediately shows a critical lack of life energy. A strong body with an exhausted aura is a classic consequence of meditation through suffering. The old man harshly warned that this practice will simply kill him if he does not stop. With these words, he again persistently poked the book at the boy, calling his method 100 times better. No! He suddenly sharply corrected himself. The old man laughed loudly, declaring that his technique was a whole 1,000 times better. The young man had to accept the gift embarrassedly, although the thought struck his mind. Why would a random passerby show such unprecedented generosity? Glancing at the papers, he muttered that he had never heard of some treatise of the heavenly demon. Saying goodbye, he walked away, mentally weighing the risks. The old man was either an ordinary swindler or had a hidden motive if he so easily gave the treasure to the first stranger. The gray-haired stranger silently extended his hand to the boy's back. "Stop," came a muffled command wrapped in dark energy. The shoe froze a millimeter above the ground. The boy was instantly paralyzed by an invisible force. He could not even move. He remained frozen in a tense pose before the old man, who calmly watched him from the bench. The old man's eyes flashed fiercely with crimson. No one who refused him, Jing Daoxian, had ever remained alive. Hearing this name, the young man turned pale. He had definitely read about him in history textbooks, a terrifying silhouette from the era of interspatial storms. The most bloodthirsty man in the world emerged in his memory. He was a true demon who drowned the Commonwealth in blood, personally killing 27 heroes of the epic class. Amid the neon lights of the night city, a brief question was heard. The young man knelt before a tall, gray-haired man who coldly asked if he was finally ready. The boy jerked his head and blurted out what he wanted. The old man slightly squinted his crimson eyes. He saw right through the boy. Verbally he agreed, but with all his being resisted learning demonic techniques. The young man broke out in a cold sweat, realizing that for contact with the Demon King, the Commonwealth would instantly throw him behind bars. The old man calmly waved it off. Even if he acquired the skill, the boy still wouldn't be able to train it. Suddenly the man raised his gaze. A predatory smile spread across his face. Another, much more interesting method was found. A mysterious black box appeared in his palm with a bright flash. The boy froze in confusion, and in the next moment, with a quick jerk, he snatched the thing from the mentor's hands. The Demon King tightly gripped his shoulder, flashing his red eyes ominously in the darkness, and stealthily advised him not to reject his kindness anymore. The frightened youth barely managed to utter a submissive no. The old man calmly held out his palm forward, covering his eyes. Throwing his hands behind his back, he walked down the neon street, ignoring the black spots that appeared on his white cloak. His lonely silhouette quickly dissolved in the light of the night city, farther and farther. Only then could the youth relax, gasping heavily for air. He looked around tensely, hoping the strange old man was not watching him from the crowd. The boy lowered his gaze to the black card in his hand, clearly realizing that he simply could not refuse it. He silently twisted the dangerous find between his fingers. Suddenly, he sneezed loudly. Startled, he jumped up and ran home. Suddenly, people in strict uniforms appeared, whose commander had just given the order over the radio to sweep the entire area. The boy froze at the roadside, cautiously watching the entire squad of Commonwealth fighters. A troubling suspicion flashed in his mind. Could it be that they were tracking the very same Jin Daoxiang? Deciding it was better not to get involved in other people's problems, he turned around and ran away as fast as he could. The night street fell silent when the key quietly clicked in the door lock. Footsteps echoed through the dark corridor of the apartment. Turning on the water, he leaned on the sink, replaying the recent events in his mind. First the attempt on Li Xuan, and now an encounter with the legendary villain. The boy wearily rubbed his hair with a towel, dreaming of only one thing: finally playing games in peace. On the sheet lay a fiery stone in a black box. He still did not know whether this new method was a blessing or a curse. Exhausted, he sighed heavily and simply fell onto the bed. But the darkness of sleep was suddenly torn apart by an anxious, echoing knock. In the bloody abyss, a gigantic, pulsating heart beat wildly. It flew like a stone into the darkness, and dozens of demonic hands greedily clung to his body. A jerk, and he jumped up on the bed, gasping for air in horror. Barely holding back nausea, the boy rushed to the bathroom and fell to his knees, not understanding what was happening to him. Cold sweat drenched his face. Suddenly he froze. A terrible suspicion flashed in his mind. On the abandoned bed, the lost Sutra of Immortality flickered ominously with blue sparks. He slowly twisted a small black box between his fingers. The boy carefully examined it from all sides, but the object seemed completely ordinary. He sighed unhappily, assuming that his recent condition was simply a consequence of anemia. Outside the window, the sunset was fading. The young man bent over the sink and splashed cold water on his face. It helped. As soon as he put down the towel, his thoughts cleared, and the weakness completely disappeared. Returning to the spacious room, he decided not to waste time and sit down to play. He comfortably settled on the edge of the bed and unlocked his phone. A quick swipe across the screen instantly launched Ancient Imperial City, and his battle avatar immediately appeared in the arena. The young man shuddered in surprise. Before him stood the boss, the General of Skeletons, whom he did not expect to see here at all. But after watching for a while, the boy realized that these game monsters posed no threat in the real world. A satisfied smile played on his lips. With one tap, he sent his character into a frontal attack, deciding to test his strength once more. In response, the Bone Rider roared fiercely and charged forward, blazing with a terrifying blue flame. His game character again helplessly sprawled on the screen. The boy collapsed, exhausted on the bed, realizing that to defeat the unarmored general without mistakes, he would have to calculate every single move. He stared at the phone with an empty gaze, feeling completely drained. But he quickly got up, deciding to spend all his free days before the announcement of the results solely on killing this boss. His fingers feverishly typed a query into the search engine about the fastest way to restore energy and health. Seeing a kilometer-long list of incomprehensible herbs and recipes, he even broke out in a sweat, deciding that ordinary water with brown sugar would suffice. Better to die less often in the game, he sighed wearily, covering his eyes with his hand. But before the gaming marathon, he needed to stock up properly on provisions. His hand went to the door handle. He decisively left the room. At the checkout of the nearest store, he paid without unnecessary words for a whole pile of instant noodles. Returning to the bed, he focused again on the screen, ready for endless attempts. A pile of empty cups and wrappers quickly grew on the floor. In the game, his avatar, a bloody whirlwind, charged at the burning skeleton, delivering a devastating sword strike. The enemy flew upside down and shouted about the end until a burning ring crashed into him. The strike shattered the barrier into pieces, and the system dropped a reward, a spatial speed crystal of the 13th level. The avatar absorbed the loot, but the game indicator stubbornly froze at 9. The boy tore himself away from the smartphone, understanding the reason. The 9th level is a dead ceiling for a mortal with his current meditation method. Hopes for a quick jump to the legendary rank burst, proving the weakness of his technique against higher skills. He rubbed his chin in confusion, since he did not want to learn the method from a demon, and had no idea where to find another. Then his eyes widened with a guess. He instantly found himself at the computer. A thing his father had passed to him through Anjing surfaced in his memory. With hope, he inserted the mysterious flash drive into the port. The boy laughed nervously, persuading himself not to expect a miracle. Where would his father have gotten something truly cool? But the monitor lit up blue and displayed the silhouette of a weapon with the skill name, Shooting at the Sun. From shock, he even pinched his cheek, checking if he was asleep. Dazzling golden energy burst from the bow. It was Shooting at the Sun, a destructive, attacking technique of epic class. Zhou Wen sat at the computer, puzzling over how his father managed to obtain such a rare Commonwealth inheritance. He wearily propped his chin with his hand, suspecting that the powerful An family had intervened here. Imagination instantly painted a pompous scene. A beaten, bloodied father beating his chest and shouting hoarsely that he would do anything for his son. The boy just snorted and waved it off. His old man was not that kind of hero at all. Sudden vibration. An incoming call from Zhou Wen lit up the smartphone screen. The father tore himself away from the chessboard and looked at the device in surprise, puffing on a cigarette. As soon as he answered, the son, instead of greeting, bluntly asked if all the old man's limbs were still intact. The man's face instantly twisted from such impudence. While the father furiously threatened to beat the scoundrel over the phone, Zhou Wen only smiled with relief. The old man was perfectly fine. Having assured himself of his father's safety, the boy gathered himself and sharply changed his tone to serious. The man on the other end of the line silently inhaled smoke, ordering him to speak. Zhou Wen frowned and directly asked where that person got "Shooting at the Sun" from. The boy silently pressed the phone to his ear. The title, "Shooting at the Sun," was a complete surprise to him. He asked confusedly, wasn't it the interlocutor who asked An Jing to pass this thing to him? The man indifferently cut off, saying that cultivation did not interest him at all. So where would he have such a thing? And the boy bitterly realized that his father had not even thought about him. Everything seemed too confusing. Why then did the girl lie that it was a gift from the father? The man on the other end of the receiver indifferently guessed that she just wanted to please him. The young man only threw back a thoughtful, "understood," in response. The interlocutor irritably lit a cigarette, mentally cursing the cheeky brat. But after deeply inhaling the smoke, he still decided to find out information for this scoundrel. Meanwhile, the boy leaned back on the bed, gathering the facts together. First, An Jin was bothering him at school, and then, through her relative commander, he almost failed the exam. And after all this, she suddenly gives him an incredibly rare technique. He wearily closed his eyes, deciding not to risk the new method until everything was finally clarified. Suddenly, a crimson heart pounded wildly in his chest, making him gasp from sharp pain. The next moment, he was already drowning in a dreadful abyss, where gigantic shadow claws reached for him. Horrified, realizing that the nightmare had begun again, cold sweat appeared on his neck from the touch of sharp demonic claws, and he cursed silently. Looking at the red glow of his own hand, he finally understood that this was no anemia. In the bathroom flooded with morning sunlight, he vomited again. The boy breathed heavily, exhaustedly wiping his mouth. He clenched the towel until it cracked, convinced that the demon Jin Dao Xin was to blame for everything. Leaning on the edge of the sink, he decided that it could not go on like this any longer. The face of an old enemy appeared before his eyes, and in his mind ripened one risky but very interesting method. A small black book gleamed in his hand. He looked at it hopefully, hoping to solve his health problems. As soon as he opened the pages, the air was illuminated by dense columns of golden hieroglyphs. The boy froze, shockingly recognizing the writing. The golden lines of the ancient text burned right in the air. The young man carefully studied the mystical symbols that surrounded him on all sides. Sitting in the epicenter of the glow, he finally grasped the essence. This is how energy is connected with the human magnetic field. Everything indicated that before him was a real cultivation manual. His deep thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the treacherous rumbling of an empty stomach. He wearily leaned back, realizing he had been reading for too long. He urgently needed to eat. The remnants of a modest dinner instantly disappeared from the plate. Satisfied, the boy exhaled and prepared to continue studying the manuscript. But then he was struck by stupor. He completely forgot at which point he had stopped. Sighing, he sat back on the bed with the black booklet, intending to reread everything from the beginning. He stared at the pages, and cold sweat ran down his temple. The runes glowed with a familiar light, but the young man could not shake the feeling that he was seeing them for the first time in his life. Something was clearly wrong. Even with the worst memory, it was simply impossible to forget everything in an instant. His fingers rested on the shining pages, slowly reading the lines about the connection between chi energy and the human magnetic field. And then his thoughts abruptly went astray. He began to wonder if he had turned off the kitchen light. The boy frowned, trying to remember. A sudden epiphany struck his brain. He stared hopelessly at the book, realizing that because of this trivial detail, what he had just read had completely evaporated from his mind. Eyes suddenly snapped open, flashing with a red gleam of frantic concentration. The finger confidently ran again over the fiery runes. Suddenly the focus faltered again. The boy wearily covered his face with his hand. Despite all the tension, he still managed to get distracted. The worst part was that magical knowledge faded from memory if he lost vigilance even for a second. A dark aura exploded around his body. He definitely was not going to give up. The attempt to rewrite the text by hand also failed. As soon as he took the pen, everything he had read instantly flew out of his head. The cunning plan with the phone also failed. The camera lens stubbornly refused to capture the magical text on the screen. Zhou Wen looked heavily at the strange book, the Lost Sutra of Immortality, and wondered whether he should hide it somewhere as far away as possible. Maybe then, these exhausting horrors and sleep paralysis would finally recede. Suddenly, the silence was cut by a phone call. The boy took the smartphone, although the caller's number was hidden. Li Xuan called, who was standing in the middle of a neon street, and he immediately asked if Wen had chosen a university. He blinked confusedly. He got carried away and completely forgot that the exam results were posted today. Li Xuan smiled confidently and suggested enrolling in the same institution as him. On the holographic board, their names hung at the very top. Xuan was first, and Wen second. Xian, Xuan said confidently. While Wen was processing the name, his friend explained. The university recently discovered a new interspatial zone, with unique creatures, so it is the perfect choice. But suddenly cold sweat broke out on Zhou Wen. He sharply remembered. Xi'an is located in Luoyang, and this city is entirely under the influence of the powerful An family. The boy was intently playing on his phone, sitting on the sofa. On the screen, his avatar was desperately fleeing from a giant purple ant. Suddenly, the character sharply turned around, gathering fiery energy in his palms. A powerful beam struck the enemy directly. The monster was torn to pieces. In reality, the boy grabbed his head in disappointment. These flying, silver-winged ants turned out to be too fast, and he could not advance any further. From exhaustion, he even had dark circles under his eyes. Suddenly, the door handle clicked. He turned around stunned. A smiling young man in a cloak was standing at the threshold. The guest cheerfully said morning and moved forward. The host only blinked in confusion, as he had not invited this impudent person inside. Walking through the room cluttered with bags, he irritably reminded that he had asked for time to think about university admission. Instead of an answer, the guest simply pressed some papers into his hands. The boy silently unfolded the document. The blue-haired one smiled slyly and displayed the secret databases of Sion on the phone screen. He pointed to a strange diagram. It turns out there are unique spatial creatures in the form of human organs. With eyes burning with excitement, he reported the appearance of these creatures in the new interspatial zone, but heard only a puzzled question. An indifferent "so what?" hit the enthusiast on the head with a heavy boulder. Exploding, he shouted that such a companion is literally a spare life, capable of instantly replacing a destroyed heart. An enthusiastic exclamation about the real benefit of such creatures was met with a skeptical question whether he understood everything correctly, and the boy assured that he did. He just no longer had the strength to be surprised. Having cooled down a bit, he added that the pass to this closed territory is exclusively for students of Sion University. And as soon as the information becomes public, the best students from all over the world will tear each other's throats out for the limited spots. The boy plunged into thought. Determination flashed in his eyes. He is definitely enrolling. He just needs to stay away from the An family. His cautious plan instantly burst when his friend joyfully announced that this family had also submitted documents there. The blue-haired one mockingly squinted from the sofa, testing his friend's resilience. The boy sharply turned away, doing his best to feign absolute fearlessness. But his fingers were already feverishly typing the application for admission on the phone. The blue-haired guest stood silently in the room, while the boy with the phone asked confusedly what they were waiting for. The answer sounded like an order. Quickly pack things to immediately set off for Loyan. Meanwhile, the girl hacker intercepted video from the cameras, and the stern boss immediately commanded to display Xiangjun Street on the screen. The figure of the unknown young man was clearly reflected in the lenses of her glasses on the large hologram. Realizing that this very boy had contacted Jing Daoxin, the boss gave a brief order to find him. Dazzling lightning mercilessly lashed the gloomy sky over the flooded ruins of the megapolis. The sports car sped along the highway, and the young man in the back seat irritably thought about the interspatial zones, through which the road took twice as much time. He wearily leaned back. There was no point in playing now, because every attempt would only be a futile waste of blood. The driver in a business suit silently glanced at him over his shoulder. The boy gave up and closed his eyes. And suddenly he sharply jumped up, covered in cold sweat. He realized with horror that if sleep paralysis hit him right in the car, serious problems would be unavoidable. He pressed his palm to his forehead, anxiously wondering if it was suddenly a fever. The old man's words about his weak body and lack of energy unpleasantly echoed in his head, forcing him to take care of his health and enter the game less often. He clenched his fist fiercely, mentally cursing Jin Daoxian. Before his eyes, the self-satisfied image of this gray-haired man appeared instantly. The young man desperately grabbed his head, vowing to definitely break his spirit as soon as he became stronger. At that very moment, his pupil sharply dilated from unexpected shock. His body froze in the seat. He knew this terrible feeling all too well. His fingers carefully felt around a dark object. He froze on the back seat, puzzled as he examined the find. Fiery hieroglyphs flashed on the cover, It turned out to be the Lost Sutra of Immortality. The young man glanced forward. The driver calmly drove the car, and Li Xuan was deeply meditating, paying no attention to him. Pressing the sutra to his chest, he decided to just kill time on the road. While the car was rushing over the bridge, the boy opened the pages, and shining golden inscriptions immediately flew into the air. Suddenly, the space shattered with a crack from a fiery flash. From the flame emerged a ghostly golden silhouette. A dazzling whirlwind instantly tore downward. All this unknown power was absorbed directly into his chest. He shuddered from shock. He looked at his empty palms. The Sutra of Immortality had vanished without a trace. The next moment, reality dissolved. He found himself in the center of a giant magical circle, wondering if this was not a dream. The glow of ancient runes was reflected in his dilated pupil. A dazzling fiery whirlwind tore through the darkness, just as he triumphantly finished reading the sutra to the end. Before his eyes flashed the updated system window. The old skill, meditation through suffering, had disappeared from his arsenal forever. The young man thoughtfully twirled a pencil between his fingers, unable to understand what kind of technique the Lost Sutra of Immortality was. But the victim justified himself. The indicators broke the 9-point mark, the absolute ceiling for the mortal class. Smiling slyly, he rubbed his chin with satisfaction. Now he had become significantly stronger, and Jin Daoxian could only sympathize. Meanwhile, a car smoothly drove through the open gates of the luxurious estate. At the gates of the luxurious estate, the owner promised to settle everything and offered to stay here until classes began, and the guest only nodded, acknowledging that he was indeed a real rich man. In the huge marble living room, the blue-haired young man looked around in surprise, not understanding how there could be no servants in such an estate. The owner named Li calmly handed him a can of cola and confirmed this, although the guest was mentally amazed at how such a spoiled boy managed without servant. The thoughts were interrupted by a sudden vibration of the phone. The blue-haired young man quickly pulled on the rake's mask. He happily chirped into the receiver, ordering the best room in the new hotel for himself. Quickly saying goodbye, he turned to the door. Li tiredly closed his eyes, took a sip, and threw back at the guest whether he was tired of playing this comedy. The foolishness instantly disappeared from the boy's face. He harshly tugged at his tie and hissed that he had to play along with his older brother, who wanted to see him as a noble. Outwardly, he again became a caring companion, wished Li to rest after the hard journey, and left the sunlit estate. Left in complete silence, Li moved to the center of the room, shedding excess clothing on the go. The jacket flew off, and the boy made a sharp lunge, cutting through the air with a powerful strike. His hand was covered with energy, but Li only analyzed the movement with disappointment. The amplitude of the Titan's fist turned out to be too large to effectively channel concentrated power into it. A recent fight with Silver-Winged Ants immediately flashed in his memory, who, thanks to their speed, easily dodged this cumbersome attack. Crossing his arms over his chest, he made an obvious decision. For future victories, he would have to look for completely different combat techniques. A hint flashed on the system screen, and he was enlightened. The skeleton palms technique. A dark mist of energy enveloped his hand, although he seriously doubted whether there would be any benefit from a lowest rank skill. With a sharp exclamation, he threw his hand forward, tearing the air with a wave of force. The strike was lightning fast. The youth immediately felt how perfectly this technique merged with his signature inch punch. Exhaling sharply, the youth repeated the strike once more. He sank heavily to the floor, barely catching his breath. The basic skill had drained almost all his spiritual energy, so now it remained to test it in action. A bloodied finger touched the screen. His avatar had just landed at the location when a giant mutant ant snapped its jaws behind his back, forcing him to flee immediately. The energy bar was empty due to recent training, when suddenly the ancient Sutra of Immortality activated and began rapidly restoring strength. This was enough for a counterattack. The avatar turned in midair and struck the monster with a thumb-sized blow, called the skeleton palm. A dull explosion sounded, and blue energy simply tore the insect apart. He was stunned by the system notification. A first-level skill suddenly evolved to the 10th, transforming into the ashen palm, capable of rivaling the most powerful elite techniques. Ordinary mobs were no longer suitable for such power, so his finger decisively hovered over the skeleton general icon. However, the avatar found himself in a golden preservation circle, and then it dawned on him. The game would not restart until the slain boss revived on its own. The boy frantically tapped the tablet screen, chipping away at the game boss's pitiful scraps of health. He focused intensely. The long attempts were not in vain, and now all the skeleton general's moves became predictable. Catching the perfect moment, the hero sharply dove under the deadly swing of the bloody blade. "Ashen Palm," he exclaimed mentally, and with a swing, drove the blazing hand straight into the enemy. The skeleton froze in stunned silence. A dazzling blue explosion tore the monster to pieces. The door flew open with a bang with a strong kick. A stranger stood on the threshold and sharply called out. The boy sleepily rubbed his eyes. She froze in surprise, and he finally woke up and screamed in horror, asking who she was. The girl ignored the scream and dryly asked where Li Xuan was, to which the boy confusedly stammered that he had left. She irritably rubbed her neck, scolding her brother who had hidden from her again. The girl was already heading to the exit, leaving the boy to wonder who she had even been. Suddenly she stopped abruptly. The next moment she firmly grabbed his wrist, as if agreeing to at least something. She forcibly pulled him along amid panicked shouts. The boy barely managed to move his feet, begging to let go of his hand and shouting that he was seeing her for the first time. Then she turned around and explained that she was the elder sister of Li Xuan. So the boy decided it was time to repay his friend for past help. He resignedly scratched the back of his head, quietly complaining that he was not allowed to play peacefully. The sister immediately pounced on him with suspicion, forcing the boy to nervously justify himself. The young man hurriedly pulled on his clothes, trying to tidy himself up a bit before going out. The girl nearby was losing patience and irritably urged him on. Soon their heavy bike was already racing through the neon-lit streets of the night city, straight to the university arena. With a loud screech of the tires, they stopped dramatically on the spot. At the entrance, acquaintances intercepted them, sighing with relief at the appearance of Wei Yan. She coldly ordered her companion to just stand aside and not interfere in anything. The boy obediently nodded, but suddenly someone else caught the girl's full attention. In the cold neon rays, the silhouettes of competitors flickered. A foreign voice echoed through the empty corridor, mockingly asking about the absence of her younger brother. Zadoraban with dreads openly mocked his cowardice, but Wei Yan sharply interrupted. She fiercely demanded an explanation why he claimed the mutant horse's egg after their joint fight. Gao Yan flatly cut in, saying that he was the one who dealt the fatal blow, and his blonde girlfriend suggested settling the matter with a simple duel for the trophy. The boy lazily straightened his shoulders, urging to start sooner because he had a bunch of other things to do. Wei Yan measured him with a deadly gaze. However, the senior student did not even think about taking a stance. He coldly stated that a fight between a fourth-year student and a second-year female student would not bring him honor, which greatly puzzled his rival. He grinned fiercely, throwing a short, "That's why." The girl on the arena flinched. From the darkness emerged a massive figure. Now her opponent would be a classmate. Gu Dian drilled her with his gaze, radiating pure, uncontrollable rage. The spectators instantly tensed, whispering and marveling at such wild anger on his face. They were left alone in the middle of the empty arena. The big guy stretched out his hand and coldly ordered to attack. At that very moment, the girl flared up with a colossal pillar of pink energy. A sharp order to prepare for battle sounded, and someone's vigilant gaze fiercely glowed crimson. The blonde young man desperately begged his sister Wei Yan to retreat, shouting that the cursed egg was not worth fighting for. The blue-haired boy nearby tensed and asked what kind of person this Gu Dian was at all. The girl shuddered, whispering that he was nicknamed the Demon. Rumors went that on the very first day, this monster cruelly beat a senior student who tried to mock him. The boy nervously swallowed, wondering if this big guy was really that dangerous. Wei Yan silently moved forward, wrapped in a pink aura, while her friends watched her back anxiously. Opposite stood the unshaken Gu Dian, and arrogantly asked if she was scared. Wei Yan shouted at him to stop talking nonsense, and, with a run-up, threw her leg in a powerful strike. Her heel, shining with energy, swiftly rushed straight at the opponent's bald head. A blow with a crash struck Gu Dian's shoulder, flashing bright sparks. From the harsh collision, a powerful wave spread in all directions. Wei Ying's eyes widened in shock. The enemy's defense turned out to be as hard as steel. She instantly jumped back, activated super acceleration, and charged into attack again. A hail of lightning-fast strikes rained down on Gu Dian, but he didn't even flinch, indifferently taking every attack on himself. She sharply kicked, putting all her speed into the attack. The bald man with a scar didn't even flinch. He just casually caught her leg with one hand. Horror flashed in her eyes. With one move, he threw her against the concrete with such force that the ground exploded with blue sparks. The girl lay motionless in the middle of the broken crater. The enemy arrogantly said she was no match for him, while she started coughing up blood. Dripping blood, she croaked that this was not the end yet. A sudden brutal kick literally knocked her body down. The bald man smiled predatory, wondering if she still wanted to fight. The witnesses of the fight completely panicked and hysterically shouted that they were ready to give up the mysterious egg. The blonde nearby only sighed condescendingly, accepting their surrender. Meanwhile, on the arena, the girl, holding her wounds and trembling, stood up again. With a broken face, she stubbornly declared that she would continue, but the man did not give her even a second. A sudden jerk, and he slammed her into the ground with all his might again. An explosive wave of energy spread across the arena as the giant harshly pressed the girl into the cracked floor. "You lost," he threw and indifferently walked away. But suddenly, he froze. From the corner of his shining eye, he noticed that she stubbornly rose for a new round. The giant snarled fiercely, and his eye flashed blood red. He was already raising his fist for a new strike. Unable to stand it, the blue-haired young man shouted, "What is she trying to achieve with this?" and sharply rushed from his place. A bright flash, a clatter, and he flew straight into the epicenter of the battle, blocking the enemy's attack dead on. The big guy lazily rolled a toothpick in his mouth and asked who this guy was. "Zhou Wen. A new student at Xi'an University," the young man said sharply. Two spectators nearby only smiled ironically, wishing the newcomer luck in the heroic rescue of the beauty. The wounded woman herself barely stood on her feet, but screamed desperately for him to run away immediately. Zhou Wen remained silent. A brief movement of the hand, ignoring the screams and protests that she was not a pig. The boy simply threw her over his shoulder and calmly carried her to rest. At the exit, acquaintances were already waiting for them, to whom Wei Yan muttered embarrassedly that she was fine. A drop of sweat rolled down his scratched face, but his gaze remained cold. They froze in the middle of the huge arena, and the burly opponent suggested not to fight at full strength to avoid irreparable consequences. The man with the scar crossed his arms over his chest and asked directly how to decide the fight then. The boy raised 3 fingers. Flames roared around his body, and he set a bold condition. If the enemy retreats less than 3 steps from his single strike, he will voluntarily admit defeat. Wrapped in a crimson aura, Gu Dian lost patience and barked at his opponent, demanding not to waste time and to strike. The boy calmly ignited his fist with golden flames and warned that he would hit with full force. In the stands, a tall spectator with dreadlocks was openly surprised that the giant so easily agreed to take the attack himself. His worried companion muttered that Gu Dian would definitely lose if he moved even an inch. However, the boy only smiled confidently. He reminded the girl that Gu Dian had absorbed the crystal of the needle porcupine. Now his body was stronger than steel, and harsh crimson spikes had already burst from his back. A gigantic phantom monster grew behind the fighter. A 9th-level skill, guaranteed deadly reflection of any damage back to the enemy. The last one who dared to strike Gu Dian like that simply lost an arm. The spectator grinned ominously, anticipating a bloody end for the naive upstart. The golden fist sliced through the air and flew forward lightning fast. A direct hit to the chest exploded with a blinding flash. Gu Dian's face instantly distorted with shock and pain, and under the burning fist, bones loudly cracked. A devastating shockwave tore through the space. Gu Dian could not hold his position. Powerful inertia harshly dragged his legs across the floor. Traces of lightning-fast movements scattered across the arena, leaving dazzling flashes of energy behind. The girl in the jacket tensed and froze, shocked by the fight's finale. The gray-haired fighter stood firmly on his feet amid the scattered light. The blue-haired youth wiped the blood and firmly stated that the elder had deliberately let him win. The opponent covered his eyes and calmly admitted defeat. The silence was cut by a voice, unemotionally demanding payment for the loss. A tall man in a black jacket stepped forward and promised to arrange delivery. The blonde instantly boiled with indignation. She burst into a scream, proving that she had not consented to give the egg, and therefore, the team's contract was invalid. Gao Yang harshly blocked her way with his hand and coldly cut off, saying he always keeps his word. Throwing a farewell glance, he promised to remember Zhou Wen and walked away into the bright corridor light. The trio remained alone in the spacious arena. The blonde immediately jumped to the boy, enthusiastically asking about his cool move and incredible strength, and the black-haired girl only thoughtfully uttered his name. At the remark about his hand broken to the point of bleeding, Li Xuan only carelessly waved it off. A trifle. It will heal on its own. The girl sternly sent him to the medical station, and the boy had to reluctantly nod. In a moment, he was dragging his unconscious friend over his shoulder with a gloomy look. The red-eyed girl warmly smiled after him, It turns out Li Xuan also has such friends. Later, the boy reached a luxurious mansion. He walked through the hall with his already bandaged hand, grumbling unhappily about lost time. Li Xuan prepared his phone, rejoicing that he could finally relax with a game. Suddenly he froze sharply. An unexpected guest appeared at the threshold of the room. With a stone face, the host first suggested calmly talking, complaining about the door broken by the guest's sister and the game that was never started. The guest stepped up close and reminded about the mysterious interspatial zone, where monsters in the shape of internal organs were found. With a sly smile, he suggested Li Xuan go there together. He hesitated whether it was worth poking around there at all. The boy did not take his eyes off the smartphone screen, reminding that the zone is closed until the start of classes. A brazen laugh sounded. Li Xuan, businesslike, adjusted his tie and declared that for him, escorting a friend inside is a piece of cake. He froze in a pompous pose, waiting for applause. But the comrade only silently flipped through the spiritual power menu on the phone. Xuan comically resented such indifference, to which he received an absolutely lethargic and dry. Brother Xuan is incredible. The blatant insincerity in the voice made him click his tongue irritably. He turned around and walked away, saying that he had to get up early tomorrow. The young man continued to silently stare at the screen of his phone. Meanwhile, the finger stopped on the screen opposite the icon with the pet's egg. The boy suddenly called out to his friend and asked what was needed to obtain a legendary level beast. The friend asked in surprise if he was thinking of breeding the skeleton general, and advised to think it over carefully. The imagination immediately pictured a fiery egg surrounded by demonic shadows. To awaken it, more than 10 points of spiritual power must be accumulated. The destructive energy blinded, dictating a harsh rule. If spiritual power runs out, magic will draw it from blood and flesh, leaving the bearer crippled. The boy squinted, clinging to one word. If the consequences happen, often, then there must be exceptions. The blue-haired one proudly grinned, confirming the guess. His crazy natural regeneration allowed him to tear apart legendary monsters without any harm to his own body. He warned, when the tear is too big, even his regeneration won't handle it, and advised to drop this idea, although he added that, if you are not afraid of death, then go ahead. Later, already in his room, he lazily tossed the trophy egg in his hand, thinking that in a normal game, death was worth nothing. His fingers squeezed the hot shell tighter. But this find was completely real. The young man abruptly sat on the bed. If his mysterious phone could scan real objects to create dungeons, then it was worth checking something else. The camera flash cut through the semi-darkness of the room. Golden holographic rings instantly enveloped the object in his hand. The screen displayed a detailed table. The inventory had just added a legendary level, General Skeleton Egg, with insane combat stats. He stared at the display in shock, impressed by the accuracy of the analysis, until his gaze caught on the mysterious Fusion button. The interface offered to combine the legendary egg with a powerful mutant ant at only 47% compatibility, and his finger pressed consent without hesitation. A cosmic vortex spun on the screen, while the boy calmed himself. He wouldn't have had enough strength for a pure general skeleton anyway, so he had to take the risk with the mutation. The system joyfully chimed success, and in the boy's shock-widened eyes reflected the dazzling light of the new creature. A system window lit up before his eyes. The bony mutant ant had a mortal level, but a 10 in strength and a dangerous spike skill. The boy sat on the bed calculating his chances. Fusion with the legendary class left him mortal, but a 10 in stats and a new skill was already not bad. He mentally launched into a battle simulation, confident that this time he would definitely tear apart the winged ant. A magic circle flared at his feet, and he threw his pet to intercept the enemy. At that very moment, a giant blade pierced the space. The enemy ant spat a bony thorn. The young man barely managed to jump out of the line of attack. The arena trembled from a series of bloody red cracks. The dead forest of crimson thorns instantly blocked all paths of retreat. The monster hovered in the air and hurled a long spear downward. Wrapped in fire, the boy rushed forward with a cry of victory. The strike cut through the space with a powerful red flash, but the terrible explosion instantly broke the attack and harshly threw his silhouette back. A bright blue wave pierced his consciousness. He suddenly came to on his own bed, shockingly realizing the creature hit him with a spiritual skill right on the fly. The sun illuminated the facade of a luxurious snow-white mansion. The brunette was tensely silent, covered in cold sweat. He asked with doubt whether it was necessary to ride horseback, while his blue-haired friend was enthusiastically petting a giant white tiger. The latter proudly explained that it was a legendary beast with jade eyes, for which they had to sweat a lot. The brunette cautiously touched the predator and warned about excessive attention, asking if they should continue the performance in front of the older brother. The blue-haired one settled on the beast's back and sharply cut in that he was not one to silently endure blows. A bold smile flashed on his face. He would never give up what he deserved. The brunette raised his hand and decisively commanded to move out. The tiger broke out beyond the gates with a powerful leap. The giant predator raced like lightning through the futuristic city, leaving only a blurred trail behind. The boy was mercilessly shaken on the beast's back, and he mentally complained why they couldn't just go by car. Spikes of the giant city rose ahead. Someone's hand confidently inserted a dark metal pass with a coat of arms into the terminal scanner. The guard in a mask briefly nodded and let them inside. A sharp click rang out, and massive blocks of a futuristic complex emerged from the darkness. The glass elevator shaft swiftly pulled them into the depths of the dungeon. The transparent cabin rapidly slid down along the blue lights of the shaft. Once this territory was the capital of Luoyang, but after the spatial storm strike, it completely collapsed underground. The elevator squeaked loudly and stopped, revealing a view of a gigantic stone head. And this very zone was called the underground city of Buddha. Near the exit, a spontaneous market was bustling. Dealers were eagerly exchanging power crystals and hawking location maps. Students were fiercely bargaining right on the stairs, struggling to catch their breath. Someone shouted that the team was missing one person, and volunteers immediately responded. The blue-haired one was stunned by the commerce in the anomalous zone, but his partner calmly cut in. The military had long since cleared the perimeter, although there was still nothing to buy here. As soon as the blue-haired one proudly flashed a secret army map, the boy mentally compared him to Doraemon and firmly stepped forward. Reaching the place, the young man guessed that this was the very underground pond where the lotus of Buddha's heart growed. His sneaker heavily landed on a slab with the outline of a palm. The smartphone camera clicked. A bright lotus flashed on the screen, confirming the suspicion. The game dungeon turned out to be an exact copy of this world. The blue-haired one irritably called out to his partner to stop photographing everything and move forward faster. They moved deeper into the cave, towards the unknown light. The walls parted, revealing a view of an underground green reservoir. Giant magical hieroglyphs flashed brightly above the water. There bloomed the lotus of the heart of Buddha, a living entity in the form of a luxurious pink flower. The target seemed too far from the shore, so the dark-haired one crouched down and suggested simply swimming to it. "No way," the comrade sharply cut off. The deadly water instantly dissolved flesh, leaving only the skeletons of those who touched its surface at the bottom. The blue-haired one tensed, realizing the hopelessness of the situation. At that moment, a flash cut through the space, and behind his partner's back, giant snow-white wings unfolded. Only one thing remained: to fly over the deadly lake. In the darkness, a giant shining lotus bloomed. A crimson flash cut through the space. His hand was enveloped by blue magic. He materialized a blade. The winged youth rushed forward and unleashed the destructive wave of the broken moon. The dazzling blade cut into the flower, shredding the petals into bloody splashes. In the darkness, two spectators noted how fast this blade was, and reminded each other that the Lo clan is famous precisely for the art of the sword. The lotus shattered into pieces, and the victor disdainfully remarked that there was nothing special about this Lo Shen. A blue-haired youth observed this. Outwardly calm, he was already envious in his mind, and dreamed of acquiring such a flying pet for himself. Nervously clutching his phone, he suggested to his gloomy partner to look for prey elsewhere, and the latter dryly agreed. The companion explained that the military had classified this area as an unknown dangerous zone, and in response to the confused question of what that meant, recalled significant losses among soldiers during the exploration. An error was flashing on the radar screen, and at their feet lay the bodies of soldiers. They had fallen dead from organ failure right on the move. The young man froze at the edge of the abyss and warned his comrade that they must act with extreme caution. Below, a terrifyingly bubbling acidic green mess churned. Suddenly, the cave walls shook from a heavy rumble. A huge white bud cracked loudly, spewing streams of green energy from its crevices. The petals sharply opened, revealing to the world a terrifying stone face, grinning with a bizarre smile. The blue-haired boy froze in cold sweat at the sight of this monster. The creature spun wildly, raising a destructive whirlwind around itself. The dark-haired fighter on a skeletal steed ordered Xiao Bai to take a slightly higher position. In the darkness, a sinister red eye suddenly flashed. A powerful beam shattered the horse's skeleton to pieces, eliciting a desperate cry from the dark-haired boy. Xiao Bai! The shockwave threw him directly into the swirling green anomaly. The blue-haired boy watched in panic, realizing that falling meant certain death for him. But the boy grouped himself in the air and softly landed on a giant lotus leaf, holding a shining blade in front of him. The blue-haired one noted that the skill of spiritual power allows him to move more easily, but the boy still flew too far from the shore. Nearby, a stunned question sounded, asking what he intended to do. He reasoned that if he did not intervene now, the boy below would surely perish. A dazzling flash of golden energy tore through the space. The blue-haired man asked confusedly what he had planned. The boy just turned away and briefly said he was going to save his friend. He pushed off and lightly jumped onto the wide leaf. Meanwhile, the spearman sharply jumped back, cursing. There was no more saving foliage left. A red beam cut through the space with a crackling sound. The explosion threw the fighter away. The bottom of the cave was flooded with turbulent green energy. Through the turbulent green glow, a figure with a blade flashed by. The pupils sharply dilated. He barely grouped himself in the air, landing right next to the massive crimson monster. Sweat appeared on his face. He clenched his teeth. The creature fiercely struck the ground, raising a deadly wave from which the fighter barely managed to jump back. Thick green slime dripped from the monster's predatory, armored snout. Having managed to jump back, the fighter in white skillfully landed on the giant shell. The blue-haired youth was horrified, recognizing the creature as the bone ant. Instead of an answer, the creature's eyes ominously flared. With the crackle of emerald lightning, the predator lunged into attack, but the fighter instantly climbed onto its spiked back. At that very second, magical lotuses bloomed beneath them, striking upward with dazzling red beams. A powerful explosion violently tossed the ant into the air. The fighter clung tightly to the armor as the carcass flew down like a stone. With a deafening roar, the monster crashed at the feet of the blue-haired man, and the fighter calmly stood atop his head. The blue-haired man was simply stunned by shock. Having won the victory, the fighter in white silently jumped to the ground and walked away. "What is your name?" Suddenly a question was asked. "Zhou Wen," the blue-haired man quietly replied. The rescued boy respectfully folded his hands in gratitude, but the young man in the dark jacket just awkwardly scratched the back of his head. Introducing himself as Luo Xuan, he fervently vowed to one day definitely repay the kindness. The young man awkwardly waved off the thanks and was already about to leave. A heavy silence hung, both froze in shock, and the rescuer cursed irritably. A giant purple monster appeared before them, from whose predatory fangs dripped green slime. Bone Ant, the young man calmly explained the origin of his new pet. His blue-haired partner rubbed his chin with interest, appreciating the coolness of the creature. The blue-haired one noted that the pond water does not corrode his companion because it is just bones, and the bloody water and seed attacks do not harm the ant at all. He immediately suggested setting the ant on the closed lotus with a terrifying face, anticipating rich prey inside. But the young man tensed. The bud did not look like an ordinary plant at all, and could be hiding a legendary-level monster. He realized the harsh reality. The death of the bone ant in this world would be final. With a bright red flash, he recalled the pet, ignoring his partner's outrage over the lost chance for a big reward. "I am not a gambler," he sharply cut off, refusing to take risks. The other asked conciliatorily if he was perhaps angry, adding that in fact, he was not as cold-blooded as he wanted to seem. The blue-haired one sprawled on the sofa and stared irritably at his phone. 2 passes burned in vain. He feared that rumors about the giant lotus would spread by tomorrow, and someone would take the prey first. The boy asked Li Xuan for a copy of the Buddha City map, just in case it might be needed someday, and he agreed without question. He was puzzled by the boy who whistled carefree on the way out. Where did he get so much joy? A bloodied finger slid across the blue screen. The space was torn apart by a bright digital tunnel with a neon lotus seal. The boy teleported to the underground city of Buddha. Just by the shore of the green lake, dozens of pink flowers bloomed abundantly. The giant lotus was nowhere to be seen, but the boy was not upset at all, and cheerfully ran forward together with his bone ant. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, a terrifying stone flower in the shape of a human face emerged from the water and opened its single bloody eye. On the shore stood a trio of competitors. Their leader decided to act decisively and immediately summoned his strongest legendary-level ward, the giant golden-eyed eagle. The man with a predatory smile adjusted his dark glasses, and the huge bird dove down like a stone, preparing to tear the monster to pieces. The giant fleshy lotus split in half, dripping blood. The avatar in the red scarf flashed past, leaving a golden trail from the blade. From above, a sharp blade mercilessly struck the flower. A vertical crimson flash finally sliced the monster. In reality, the young man looked at the screen with relief. After endless cleanups, finally some loot dropped. It turned out to be a skill crystal, although Li Xuan never mentioned what exactly falls from the Buddha's lotus. The character absorbed the find, instantly flashing with blue energy. The boy sat in the lotus position, channeling the aura through his own body. No usual pain, only pleasant warmth. An invisible drop slowly fell down, echoing in the very heart. A system message popped up before his eyes, about learning the heart-calming skill at level 7. He thoughtfully rubbed his chin, assuming that this was a technique for strengthening spiritual power. The youth immediately activated the skill to test it in action. The enthusiasm immediately faded. Apart from a slight warming, there was no effect. No wonder Li Xuan even forgot to mention this useless thing. The phone in his hand blinked, and at that moment, a deadly crimson flash tore through the space. The boy barely managed to jump back, staring confusedly into the void. The water parted with a splash, releasing a massive bud to the surface. The shell opened, revealing a bare foot, lotus of the heart of Buddha, with a predatory metallic smile. The young man only confidently snorted. As he had expected, this monster existed in the game too. He instantly summoned the bone ant, which met the enemy with fierce hissing. "In the game we have nothing to fear," he declared, reinforcing his words with the icy gaze of his beast. The ant, without hesitation, rushed into a frontal attack. Lotus released 3 swirling energy spheres, but a bone barrier sharply rose to meet them. A series of heavy explosions sounded, flooding the space with blinding red light. Through the smoke, the green eye of the unharmed ant flashed predatory. Lotus quietly submerged back under the water. Deciding that the enemy was trying to escape, the young man ordered the bone ant to finish him off. But suddenly a terrifying, fleshy maw opened with dozens of fangs, ready to tear the prey to pieces. The blade cracked as it sliced through the monster's head. Blood splattered. But it was just a game. In reality, the boy was sitting on the bed with his phone, irritably realizing that he had been stupidly tricked. On the screen, his blue-haired avatar was pondering. Without the bone ant, you can't stumble into the pond now. Having nothing to lose, since after death he would be reborn anyway, the hero decided to check the forbidden zone that Li Xuan had mentioned. He rushed forward through a long, crystalline tunnel. From the ruined stone bas-reliefs and ancient statues, water echoed as it dripped. Climbing the wide stairs into the fog, the hero tensed. It was too quiet around, and no monsters appeared on the way. Suddenly, he froze. The forbidden zone appeared right before him. From the thick fog emerged a huge gate with the inscription, Little Buddha Temple. He confusedly began to read the inscription aloud. His foot crossed the temple's boundary. But as soon as he finished reading the name, the smartphone screen in the real world went dark, flashing a sudden game over. He stared at the screen in confusion, not understanding how his character could have died so suddenly. His fingers clenched the phone until they turned white. He restarted the level, and his virtual avatar dashed up the stone stairs at full speed. Only dust flew from beneath the small feet. A dull blow, and suddenly someone's massive boot blocked the path. The cold inscription "Game Over" immediately appeared on the screen. At that very second, the boy turned pale and painfully grabbed his chest. Death in the game really twisted his insides. Li Xuan's words were confirmed. The enemy leaves no external wounds. It destroys organs from within. Realizing why even the military were powerless against this anomaly, he threw the smartphone onto the bed, and then he himself collapsed face down onto the pillow, exhausted. Above the dark spires of the futuristic city, the morning sun was already rising. Suddenly, the silence of the light-filled apartment was broken by someone's confident, resonant laughter. The blue-haired boy did not take his eyes off the phone. As he expected, the news about the lotus heart of Buddha caused quite a stir. The boy was calmly brushing his teeth and froze in surprise with the brush in his mouth, trying to understand what was happening. The blue-haired boy did not look away from the smartphone, excitedly telling how the day before, some senior student had unleashed his eagle on the flower. He burst out laughing across the room because the attacker's bird simply caught fire and lost all its feathers. The brunette only sighed inwardly. If he had listened to his friend yesterday, now the whole university would already be laughing at them. Student chats were bursting with messages from new daredevils who wanted to try their luck. While the boy was washing his face, the The blue-haired boy asked why the army had not yet intervened in the situation. The brunette wiped his face with a towel, fully understanding that among both the military and the students, there were fighters capable of destroying this target. However, the friend was right. The army would continue to stand aside. According to the Commonwealth rules, soldiers engaged in battle only against monsters of a certain danger level. Therefore, an ideal window opened for the boys to obtain valuable resources. A sharp knock on the door interrupted the thoughts. Blue-haired called out to the unknown guest to come in, and at that very moment, the telephone ringtone sounded in the room. The father's number lit up on the screen. The boy confusedly accepted the call. On the other side of the receiver, the father, looking at the city through the panoramic window, tensely asked if his son was currently in Luoyang. Zhou Wen reluctantly picked up the receiver, not yet knowing what the satisfied father had prepared for him, and he joyfully announced, "The new stepmother wants to meet with her stepson for a family lunch." The boy asked again in confusion and cut off, saying that everything was fine with him now, and he did not want his father to spoil it. Suddenly a cry echoed through the estate. Someone was urgently looking for the boy. Zhou Wen left and tried to brush off the old man, but he declared that An Jing had already left to pick up his son. Hearing this name, the boys suddenly froze. The father continued babbling into the receiver, and Zhou Wen was already overwhelmed by an icy premonition of trouble. The air was sharply cut by a swift movement. Cold sweat appeared on the boy's face. Right in front of him, crossing her arms on her chest, stood the very same An Jin, silently burning him with a superior gaze. Li Xuan blurted out in shock that Ouyang Lan's fiancé was his friend's father. Because of the shared surname, he quickly put the puzzle together. The young man was also inseparably connected to the An family. He grimly cut off, saying that these were his father's affairs, and he did not want to have anything to do with this family. A contemptuous snort was heard from the side. The girl sharply threw on her cloak and unequivocally ordered him to follow her to the car. The young man cursed inwardly. He had come to Luoyang specifically to avoid the An family, but they showed up themselves. After asking Li Xuan to wait, he resigned himself and followed. Both silently headed down the wide avenue toward the exit. Without turning around, the girl reproached him for not practicing the shooting at the sun technique at all. The young man took out a black flash drive and admitted that his father had forbidden sending these techniques. The girl instantly flared up with accusations of forgery. She sarcastically exclaimed that she deliberately wanted to harm him and irritably quickened her pace. The young man was surprised at how easily she admitted it. However, whether it was genuine or a technique no longer mattered. He practiced the lost sutra of immortality, and other methods of cultivating spiritual power were unavailable to him. By her red sports car, she impatiently snapped, demanding to get into the cabin immediately. The young man reached for the door handle, while every one of their movements was already being closely watched through the lens of a hidden camera. He slowly lowered the camera. The dossier of Zhou Wen, an outstanding fighter who won second place in the school exam, flashed on the holographic display. The red-haired subordinate reported that the subject was currently in Luoyang, which was why his traces had been searched for so long. No connections with Jing Daoxian were found in the young man. The subordinate added another interesting detail. The boy's father, Zhou Lin Fen, had recently married a widow from the An family. Him? The captain stared at the screen in surprise. The man paused thoughtfully, wondering what could have interested Ouyang Lan herself about this young man. He assumed that Zhou Lin Fen had made a deal with a foreign syndicate, but the girl objected. Despite legendary power, age was against him. In that harsh community, they would simply have laughed at him. She tentatively assumed that the mighty Ouyang Lan simply liked the handsome face of the boy. The captain's lenses flashed in the dark. He realized that this woman would never have stooped so low. He recalled the chaos after the death of the head of the An family, when the influence over the empire was miraculously held in the hands of a 13-year-old heir. Everyone perfectly understood who exactly stood behind the boy then. Confident that such a woman would never choose a loser, the captain gave a cold order: find a way and immediately bring Zhou Wen to them. The man in dark glasses gave a strict order. The An family must not suspect anything, under any circumstances. When the car arrived at the place, a sharp command to get out was heard. The young man got out of the car and thoughtfully snorted. Before him stood a luxurious palace. The scale of the An family's possessions was truly impressive. The silence was suddenly broken by a rough shout. A local with a cigarette in his teeth contemptuously called the guest a scoundrel. Instead, his companion looked completely different. She languidly greeted Zhou Wen, sweetly saying that she had been eagerly awaiting this meeting. The table was bending under luxurious, perfectly prepared dishes. A woman in an elegant dress smiled and offered to taste her own cooking. She boasted that freshly caught shrimp were delivered by plane, especially for little Jing. The blue-haired girl nodded smugly. Suddenly, it was revealed that all these delicacies were actually prepared for the guest, Zhou Wen. The young man froze confusedly over the huge portion. Behind him, the hellish aura of the furious Jing was already blazing, making the boy break out in a cold sweat. The hostess whispered that she deliberately provoked her daughter for past offenses, while the boy nervously chewed the treat. He looked at this gentle woman and simply could not believe that she could be the mother of that demoness. When he was offered to move in with them, the boy refused with both hands, fully understanding An Jing would simply kill him. Then the woman insistently placed a black object in his palm. It turned out to be a pass card to his own room in the Xi'an dormitory. Zhou Wen mentally rejoiced, for now no one would disturb him from playing games. But the joy quickly turned into suspicion. How did his father even find out about his desire to live alone? He gratefully took the black card, calling the interlocutor Auntie, but she only smugly adjusted her blue hair and ordered to call her Lady Lan. She was not going to register herself as old. The boy nervously blinked, mentally wondering how painfully women perceive questions of age. Silence fell in the apartment. The neighbor disappeared somewhere again, so the well-fed and full of energy young man happily went to play. In a moment he was already scattering giant insects in the ant cave dungeon. A powerful hook and a fresh egg fell from the fallen monster. But the joy instantly faded, because the system characteristics of the new mutant turned out to be pathetic compared to the last time. Suddenly the air was cut by a whistle, and a winged enemy dived down fiercely from above. The boy shouted indignantly at such a treacherous attack. He barely managed to dodge the deadly red flash. He had to go into a tight defense and patiently dodge to avoid instant death. As soon as the monster approached, the young man launched a counterattack, but missed and got a painful blow himself. Blood appeared on his cheek, and his gaze became cold. Now he would have to finish this creature with one strike. The red silhouette flashed and sharply dissolved into the darkness. The boy instantly activated the glowing armor on his arm, having figured out the enemy's old trick. He tightly squinted, admitting that his eyes could no longer keep up with this speed. Right behind his back, a sinister shadow with burning eyes emerged. Calculating the trajectory, the young man sharply turned and struck with his fist preemptively, harshly blocking the monster's attack. The huge red monster was rushing forward at insane speed, breaking through attacks. An instant swing. The boy sharply closed the distance and hit the monster with a powerful burst of blue energy. Space was torn apart by a blinding explosion. The broken monster fell to the ground, emitting smoke, but still tried to move. Giving him no chance, the young man rushed forward for the final blow. A brutal, bloody slash pierced the shell through and through. The boy stopped over the defeated enemy, breathing heavily. A quiet clink, and a glowing red egg fell from the body. Seeing this on the screen, he couldn't hold back a joyful exclamation, as he had obtained rare loot on the very first try. But the system window made him freeze. The game offered fusion with a bone ant, but compatibility was a miserable 20%. He sincerely did not understand why two ants had worse compatibility than the skeleton general before. Rejecting this option, the hero decided to simply try to raise a legendary level pet from the egg. Sitting in a dark room in front of the smartphone screen, he thought the game would not affect real life anyway, and took the risk. The boy decided to take the risk, and confidently pressed the hologram button. At that very moment, he was pulled into a dark energy vortex. A blue aura wildly swirled around, mercilessly draining his spiritual strength. Bright rays merged into one dazzling flash. On the floor next to his exhausted hand, a mysterious red core fell with a dull thud. The boy screamed madly. From his back, tearing flesh like fangs, bloody tentacles suddenly burst out. He clenched his teeth until they cracked from hellish pain. Coughing up blood, the hero collapsed heavily to the ground. A dark puddle spread across the floorboards. Shuddering from weakness, he barely lifted his head and was horrified by how much blood he had lost. His strength finally vanished, and his body limply sprawled in the middle of the empty room. The silence was suddenly broken by the sharp beep of a smartphone. The space around was instantly filled with fiery ancient runes. His eyes suddenly opened wide. In the semi-darkness, heavy intermittent breathing was heard. Spitting out blood, he exhaled heavily. If this had happened not in the game, he would already be dead. A bloodied finger touched the screen. Wiping his mouth in the semi-darkness, he considered the worst-case scenario. In case of failure, the egg might simply disappear. His gaze stuck to the display. And then the game announced success. His avatar jumped up triumphantly, rejoicing that, thanks to the silver-winged Mirazi, he could finally fly and destroy the lotus. The character commanded a summon, gathering a cluster of purple energy in his hand. A powerful flash of light tore through space, but when the smoke cleared, instead of an epic monster, a tiny flying bug appeared before him. The boy was petrified with surprise. His outraged scream shook the entire estate. The status window proudly displayed the inscription, "Legendary Level." Although the creature's basic characteristics turned out to be simply pathetic, the expanded characteristics window puzzled him, with the inscription about the initial stage. Staring at the phone, he could not understand why the monster was so weak, although not long ago it had almost killed him. The boy held a huge red insect in his hands, and caught himself thinking that it looked quite cute. Suddenly, a sharp system beep cut through the silence. An alarming message popped up before his eyes. The silver-winged ant was incredibly hungry, and it needed to be fed immediately. He broke out in a sweat and fell into a stupor, feverishly pondering what such creatures even eat. His finger touched the hologram, selecting food for the pet. The boy glared irritably at the screen. This little creature refused to eat ordinary monsters and demanded exclusively other pets and their eggs. The red insect in his hands only blinked innocently with its big eyes and drooled. The hero resignedly reached for the system window. One click, a heavy sigh, and he fed the little one a valuable egg. The trainee shone with the received energy, but he was still too weak for battle, so the boy decided to test him in wing mode. A dazzling red flash cut through the space. The light went out, and the boy froze in confusion, seeing a pair of tiny pink wings behind his back. Without much thought, he pushed off the ground, and with a sharp jerk, flew forward through the spacious cave. The speed and maneuverability turned out to be simply insane. However, the joy quickly faded. The wings did not allow him to rise high into the air. The skill worked only for flying just above the ground, so there was no point in wasting time on the ants below anymore. The boy accelerated and, like a swift shadow, darted deeper into the darkness of the tunnel. The tunnel walls ahead were covered with blue armored ants with dim eyes. The boy raced at full speed, feeling the tunnel walls pressing from all sides. An ambush awaited ahead. Dozens of red eyes of blue armored monsters glowed in the darkness. He froze in place, covered in cold sweat. Flying up to the very ceiling, the boy was horrified. The bottom of the cave was completely filled with enemies. This endless living sea surged in waves, but in a moment he smiled confidently. The ability to fly made him unreachable for this ground horde. Suddenly the monsters merged into a giant black paw that fiercely lunged after him upwards. The horde surged upward in a solid wave, and sparks flew from the collision. The creatures quickly climbed, one after another, building a living tower. The young man struck with the ashen palm, and blue energy shot straight into the thick of the monsters. A deafening explosion sounded, and dazzling blue energy tore through the darkness. The destructive wave crashed with a crack right into the stone vault. The boy was lifted by the force of the blow and flew backward head over heels. From the shaking, a giant stone boulder broke off from the ceiling and crashed down with a rumble. Bright light suddenly broke through a crack in the stone boulder. The boy hung upside down and stared in shock at the find. It was a gigantic anthill. In a moment, the nest wall burst. A swarm of winged monsters with red eyes rushed straight at him. Only his bloodied hand emerged from the dark whirl, while the system activated the rescue. Catching his breath in safety, he thoughtfully twirled the card between his fingers. This dungeon held many more secrets. It was too early to storm the lair, so the young man decided to restore the conquered ant to its true form. His stomach growled loudly here. At home, only the shining, empty shelves of the refrigerator awaited him. Sighing wearily, the boy realized he couldn't do without a nighttime food run. His lonely figure moved through the cold streets of the cyber city. They reported via radio that the object had left Li Xuan's house and was heading to the central street, and asked whether to take him right now. Somewhere nearby, a red-haired girl calmly touched up her lips. There were enough witnesses around, so for the sake of old Chow's order to keep the secret, she took all the work upon herself. And the young man, hiding his hands in his pockets, walked unhurriedly down the neon alley. She seductively pulled up the edge of her dress, absolutely sure that this boy would not be able to resist her. The red-haired woman smiled predatory, waiting for the young man in the black jacket to come closer. As soon as he caught up with her, she deliberately stepped right under his feet. The woman dramatically sat down on the cobblestones, loudly whining in pain. With tears in her eyes, she plaintively begged the nice boy for help. But he simply walked past, leaving her in silent shock. Her face instantly twisted with anger, because this impudent fellow spat on her charms. The woman quickly got up and rushed after him, ready to play her trump card. The boy calmly thought about the search for the bloody lotus, when suddenly, Someone's hand firmly grabbed his sleeve. She playfully asked where he was rushing to, and the young man only confusedly asked who she was. The stranger tried to play the confused victim, but when the young man cold-bloodedly took out his phone to call the police, she had to panic and interrupt him. Then she changed tactics, coquettishly squinted and asked at least to be escorted home. The young man curtly cut her off, saying he was rushing to dinner, and advised her to look for someone else. The woman froze, shocked that ordinary food turned out to be more attractive to him than she was. Her eyes flared with rage, and a magical sphere spun in her palms. Since kindness didn't work, she would pull him by force. The woman in white swiftly lunged at him from above, releasing blood-red threads of energy. A dazzling explosion tore through the street. Somewhere above, a boot thudded dully against a metal crossbar. When the smoke cleared, she stared confusedly at the empty asphalt. The boy stood unharmed, high on a neon sign, with ghostly wings glowing behind his back. A realization flashed in his eyes. This was the same stranger who had previously been stalking Jin Daoxiang. Realizing she had underestimated her enemy, the girl surrounded herself with flames and prepared to fight seriously. But instead of continuing the fight, the boy calmly called the police, immediately causing the attacker to panic over possible suspicions from the powerful An family. She snorted irritably, shouting that this time she would leave him alive. The girl turned around and walked away. The young man cautiously peeked out from behind the cover, not believing that she really left. Fingers tightly gripped the black smartphone. The boy sank heavily to the ground, feverishly wondering why the people from the community needed a young man who had done nothing. He confusedly rubbed his chin. The young man froze in shock, covered in cold sweat. The suspicion hit like an electric shock. Could it be that he was really recorded as an accomplice of Jin Daoxian? The panic was interrupted by a sharp beep. The name Zhou Wen lit up on the vibrating phone screen. Meanwhile, in a noisy bar, the blue-haired young man looked at the screen in surprise, seeing who was calling him. At the other end, the blue-haired boy with a soda in his hand broke into a smile, openly amazed by such a surprise. However, his gaze instantly became icy, and he dryly ordered to find a quiet place. He added that he must tell something important. Li Xuan pressed the phone to his ear in shock. His friend had really met Jing Daoxiang himself. He almost shouted with envy, dreaming of seeing this living legend too. On the other side of the receiver, the young man only sighed with relief. It was good that he kept silent about the Demon King's interest in the Sutra of Immortality. Otherwise, his friend would definitely have lost his mind. Instead, Li Xuan immediately identified the mysterious pursuers from the description. They were the hyenas. He explained that this shadow organization does the dirtiest work when legal methods are powerless. Cruel, unscrupulous predators who fully justify their nickname. The young man immediately understood that these dogs would not leave him alone just like that. There was only one way out, so he sharply asked how to enter the university as soon as possible. Li Xuan smiled slyly. The plan was perfect, because even special services would not dare to act openly on the territory of Xi'an University. He jokingly advised seeking protection from the influential An family, but the boy only awkwardly waved it off, asking for direct help with admission. For Li Xuan, this was a trifle, so he promised to arrange everything, and at the same time, submit an application for early enrollment himself. Finally, he assured that he would use his father's connections to deter the pursuers, for which he received sincere thanks. A finger pressed the call drop button. The young man helplessly lowered his hand, tired of troubles pouring one after another. In the cold half-darkness of the room, he gloomily looked ahead, bitterly cursing his own weakness. A blue loading bar filled his eyes. The system instantly displayed new interface windows. The headquarters of the Commonwealth Special Inspection Department calmly towered against the sky. A palm slammed onto the table with a crash. The boss shouted fiercely that the operation was supposed to be quiet and unnoticed. The long-haired chief menacingly loomed over the red-haired subordinate, demanding explanations after a reprimand from higher management. The girl silently felt guilty, while he blamed the failure on the scouts who misjudged the strength of their target. Grasping her chest, she desperately began to plead for one last chance. The man heavily fell into the chair and grimly cut off. Now reaching Zhou Wen would be much harder. The boss pushed a blue folder across the table to her, ordering her to look at this. Suddenly the girl froze in surprise. He explained that he had asked his mentor to obtain secret information about Uyan Lan and the An family, and suggested to familiarize herself. She hurriedly unfolded the pages of the blue folder. Her eyes widened in shock. What she read simply did not fit in her mind. Leaning over the table, she asked in astonishment, how the An family could have given the rightful place of An Jing to this stranger, Zhou Wenyu, to which the boss only calmly shrugged. The man in dark glasses leaned on the table, admitting that although the situation was unclear, there was no mistake here. The An family used their only right to substitution and gave the place to Zhou Wenyu. The man thoughtfully rubbed his chin. Both Jing Daoxian and the influential family unexpectedly agreed on one young man. His gaze slid over the photograph in the open dossier. This boy was truly intriguing. Meanwhile, Zhou Wen himself suddenly shuddered while walking. He confusedly rubbed his nose, suspecting that someone had just mentioned him. Finally, the young man reached the desired place. Ahead, in the cold neon light, his goal towered, the Grand University of Xi'an. The boy walked along the sunlit sidewalk, checking the route on his phone. He was looking for the Garden of Four Seasons. Stopping in front of a modern high-rise, he decided he had come to the right address. He slowly ascended the stairs. He placed the electronic card on the scanner. A quiet ding sounded. The door opened, and he entered a spacious, bright apartment, mentally appreciating Mrs. Land's unusual taste. A smile touched his lips. The new life had officially begun. However, the euphoria quickly faded when he looked into his backpack. In his haste, he had taken too few things with him. He would have to go shopping, so he opened his phone again, using the navigator to find the nearest store on the campus grounds. Without taking his eyes off the screen, the boy stepped back into the corridor. The echoing clatter of footsteps made him stop. A girl was just coming down the stairs. He looked up and froze in surprise. It was An Jin. He asked in surprise if she really lived one floor above. The girl tensed, staring at him with open confusion, but instead of answering, she only snorted irritably, and proudly turning her head away, sharply walked past. The girl quickly headed up the stairs, and he only sighed. It was easier to pretend nothing had happened. A massive industrial building towered before him. He stared at the phone screen in confusion. The navigator stubbornly showed that the store was somewhere nearby. Looking around the deserted alley, the boy doubted whether he had even turned there. There was not a soul around, and he was already thinking about whom to ask for directions. Suddenly, a quiet meowing sounded. Cat? He wondered. From behind the wall came someone's voice kindly praising the fluffy creature, and the boy rejoiced at the chance to find a passerby. He moved toward the sound, although the voice somehow seemed very familiar to him. Peeking out from around the corner, he began to politely apologize, but the words got stuck in his throat. On the ground sat a formidable, scarred giant who was gently stroking a small kitten with a tender smile. The boy was simply stunned. A pause hung in the air, after which he shockingly squeezed out the giant's name, Gu Dian. Meanwhile, the white kitten was calmly crunching food from the bowl. The giant in red crouched down, carefully picking up the street cat with his bandaged hands. But in a moment his eyes flared with a bloody light. He gripped the boy's shoulder with a deathly grasp and growled that he would kill him if he told anyone about what he had seen. The young man confusedly justified himself, saying he only wanted to ask the way to the store, and the giant reluctantly agreed to give directions. Suddenly stepping back sharply, he walked away, indicating the direction to the old part of the campus, where security was supposed to escort the young man to the store. Suddenly he froze. From beneath the hood, a predatory gaze flashed again. The giant harshly ordered not to touch the animals. While Gu Dian disappeared into the fog of the empty street, the boy reached out and gently stroked the cat. After the spatial storm, people sought to make contracts only with powerful monsters, so no one had paid attention to ordinary small beasts for a long time. Remembering the embarrassed face of the stern Gu Dan, the boy thought that this fierce tiger actually also had a weakness for tenderness. Bathed in sunlight, he smiled warmly and calmly sat down to play with the fluffy wanderers. The words, "Game over," flashed again on the smartphone screen. The boy irritably grabbed his head, not understanding the logic of the game at all. He nervously bit his finger. His avatar froze in front of the stairs to the small Buddha temple, where a mysterious deadly force did not allow entry. He had already wasted a bunch of lives. The hero was killed without warning, even when trying to fly over the dangerous zone. It was enough to take a step, and the bloody shadow dealt an instant, fatal blow. The boy leaned back on the sofa, convincing himself that every game must have a solution. Even the strong monsters sent forward died within seconds, never finding a blind spot for attack. Suddenly, he was enlightened. All this was not at all like a battle with a boss. The deadly obstacle was just ordinary locked doors. You just need to find the key. Only the lonely pond remained to be checked in the empty city. Here his gaze caught on the forgotten skill, calming the heart, of the 7th level, and the boy guessed that maybe the solution was in it. The character flared with a blue aura, activated a local skill that only burned mana without any benefit, and sharply stomped on the stone. Wrapped in a blue aura, the avatar decisively stepped onto the stairs, finding a completely new use for the skill. Safe landing. The boy grinned triumphantly at the screen. The risky calculation worked, and the hero survived. The path to the temple was open, so the drawn character confidently stepped forward. Suddenly he froze comically in horror, looking at the spiritual power gauge above his head. The protective glow suddenly went out. Energy consumption skyrocketed, making the hero scream in panic, poking at the endurance bar. The player clicked his tongue irritably and bit his finger to the blood out of frustration. The character dropped to the ground again, activating a skill in a cloud of blue digital sparks. There was only one way out, to cover the entire distance in a single mad dash. However, his strength instantly ran out, and the avatar collapsed face first into the mud, helplessly exhaling. A drop of blood deliberately fell right on the smartphone screen. The boy changed tactics and unleashed a flying ant. This time, the hero shot forward like a torpedo, leaving only rings of light behind him. But the ending remained unchanged. The super speed burned mana even faster, and the disappointed player had to watch the sprawled corpse of his avatar again. Level 7 turned out to be insufficient. The blue aura dissipated, and the young man reluctantly admitted that he would have to clear the lotus pond again. Suddenly the phone screen buzzed. He wearily closed his eyes and irritably accepted the call. On the other end, a familiar voice cheerfully urged him to hurry, to the very same pond where the real show was just beginning. To the counter question, the boy only slyly winked. Meanwhile, in the rocky gorge, the crowd had already surrounded two people, a red-haired strongman and a serious brunette. The strongman smiled arrogantly at her face, while the voice of a friend on the headset intriguingly added that he would see everything himself when he arrived. Third-year student Yan Li boldly blocked the way of first-year student An Jing, loudly promising to kill the dangerous monster as a gift for her admission. The girl didn't even stop and walked past, sharply cutting off that she didn't need any gifts. Without turning around, she unemotionally finished. He would never defeat this bloody lotus. Yan Lei fiercely stared after her, while the guys in the crowd whispered that the powerful An family had long studied this monster thoroughly. One of them, a blue-haired young man, mockingly explained to his friend, Yan was just pathetically currying favor, since his clan was completely dependent on their influential family. Rudely shutting his friend's mouth, he reminded him that Jing was actually the younger sister of his comrade, when suddenly a figure emerged from the shining tunnel. It was the girl's older brother, who appeared extremely tired and quietly muttered that he didn't want to openly get involved in the conflict. The sister walked past coldly, not even looking at him, and the brother only sighed. Had he really been dragged here for this circus? The blue-haired one, with a sly smile, patted him on the shoulder, asking if he would stand up for his sister against the persistent suitor. The brother lazily scratched the back of his head, and both relaxed, preparing to watch the show. Meanwhile, the offended Yanla flared up with rage. His eyes lit up red, and he growled that he would definitely tear the monster apart and force her to accept the gift. Jin didn't even flinch, and only advised him not to disgrace himself with empty promises. Driven to madness, Yan Lei raised his hand, and around him with a deafening roar, a colossal pillar of magical energy struck the sky. The space was torn apart by the dazzling blades of unleashed power. In the whirlwind of dazzling blue magic, two gigantic silver hawks materialized. The young man in the leather jacket turned pale with horror. Legendary creatures appeared before him, and immediately, a pair at that. Their red-haired master cold-bloodedly ordered to immediately finish off the enemy. A devastating energy beam struck from above. The attack crashed into the barrier, exploding with a bright fountain of light. The red-haired one confidently grinned, calling this resistance a pathetic trick. The predators swiftly went into a dive, unleashing a barrage of new strikes on the target. The young man exhaled joyfully, certain that the bloody water would not pierce the legendary feathers, and victory was already in the bag. But the blue-haired partner behind instantly dampened his enthusiasm. He tensely cut in that the battle was still ongoing. Steel claws tore through the enemy's armor with a screech, sparking showers of sparks. Suddenly, the dull shell split along the seams. The hawk froze in midair. From the red darkness of the rift, a huge bloodshot eye stared closely at him. The red-haired man froze in shock, not understanding if he was really angry. Twisted vines stretched into the crimson sky. Spatial plant-like creatures were usually considered weak, but from the poisonous green water emerged a pale, armored monster with a terrifying eye, and the red fighter shouted defiantly that he would tear it to pieces. The young man sharply thrust his hand forward, releasing a roaring firebird. The flames swirled, the heat condensed and crashing onto the enemy as a giant, shining claw. An explosion thundered, but the monster managed to envelop itself with a whirlwind of a blood-red shield. The redhead recoiled. He had not expected the plant to also have spiritual defense skills. However, in the next moment, he snarled fiercely. The shield covered only 4 sides, so the fighter struck head-on to divert attention. And another fiery hawk was to strike deadly dive-bombing from above. The blue-haired youth nearby suddenly tensed. "It's a trap!" he shouted, and the redhead froze confusedly as a pillar of fire descended from the sky. Instead of defending itself, the monster opened its terrible spiked maw and caught the flame right in the center. The monster screamed wildly, trembling from the explosive force of the fire. The crowd behind whispered in shock. The attack took only seconds, and if Yan Li continued in the same spirit, he would lose absolutely everything. The red-haired man stared ahead in stunned silence, unable to utter a single word. The burning phoenix sharply folded its wings and vanished into the air at the commanding order to return. The red-haired man silently clenched his fist, still sparking with flames, barely restraining his rage after the failure. From the brightly lit tunnel came calm footsteps. A young man with blue hair entered the dark cave. He stopped right in front of the redhead, meeting his tense gaze. The redhead immediately went on the offensive, and sharply asked how Wen knew from the very beginning that he would not overcome the lotus of the heart of Buddha. The boy awkwardly looked away and hesitated confusedly. But then a small blonde boy quickly interjected between them, loudly cutting in that the outcome of the battle was obvious to everyone. He proudly put his arm around Wen's shoulder and boasted that his little brother took the honorable 2nd place in the combat skills exam in Guide. Hearing about the 2nd place in Guide, the redhead gave a crooked smile and admitted that the opponent was indeed strong. Brazenly raising his nose, the small boy finished off his opponent. In his place, he would have sunk through the ground from shame for losing his silver chick. The redhead's eyes flashed fiercely, and his aura exploded with fire. He growled, demanding a brilliant murder plan from this praised fighter. The small boy did not even blink, confidently stating that Wen definitely would not disgrace himself the same way. The blue-haired one only silently sighed, openly regretting his companion's long tongue. Suddenly, the rustle of clothing sounded. A dark-haired girl swiftly landed right in front of them and immediately met Wen's surprised gaze. She looked at him tensely, asking again if he really could handle this monster. The blue-haired young man froze, staring at the girl opposite. Thoughts were racing. In the game, he still couldn't defeat the Lotus, and the real monster with the bloody pattern also attacked with skills that didn't even exist. She cast an icy glance at him from beneath her thick bangs. He clenched his fist until his knuckles turned white. Suddenly a mocking laugh sounded. The red-haired boy theatrically slapped his forehead. He arrogantly said that the opponents were just scared and could only babble. In response, there was a proposal to try to defeat the boss together, and the red-haired boy cautiously raised his eyes. The conversation was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of 2 boys, and the red-haired boy tensely shouted the name Li Xuan. He was clearly embarrassed. No one expected that the famous dandy from the influential Li family would decide to help. But the uncertainty instantly disappeared. The red-haired boy grinned fiercely, declaring that these weaklings had no chance, since even the Silver Hawk lost here. Spreading his arms, he mockingly moved to the edge of the huge crater. The spectacle was beginning. Meanwhile, the boys started discussing tactics. While one comically scolded his friend for his long tongue, the young man assessed the chances. It would be easier to defeat the boss together, especially with 2 legendary disciples of Li Xuan. They lined up in front of the boundless shining pond. The young man frowned. First, they needed to find a way down, because the bone ant would definitely not withstand all 3 of them. The blue-haired Li complained that for the search of the lotus, he had only obtained a flying mollusk, but Zhou Wen was not convinced by this weak pet at all. Their companion in the brown jacket adjusted his shining mask and confidently declared that he would take this upon himself. The eyes beneath the metal flashed blue. From the magical vortex flew out a massive, armored monster, resembling a demonic turtle. The beast crashed into the ground with a roar, raising a pillar of green energy. The energy transformed into a gigantic shield made of dragon scales, and Li was frankly surprised that his comrade had concealed such a strong pet. The protective field tightly enclosed the space. The white-winged monster found itself before an impregnable barrier, behind which the trio stood safe. The boy in the mask smiled carelessly and told his friends to start the attack, while he held the defense. Li's face was distorted by dark cracks, and Zhou Wen flared with a fiery aura. Both were ready to kill. Zhou Wen sharply pushed off the ground and soared into the air. In a bloody glow, a gigantic shadow beast emerged, and the boy softly landed right on its spiked back. "My turn," Li barked, crossing his arms, which instantly blackened and filled with molten magma. His destructive red whirlwind tore through space, causing random spectators to scream in shock. No one expected the spoiled third son of the Li family to have a monster of legendary level. Wrapped in a whirlwind of crimson-black energy, the knight raised a massive blade and commanded to begin. The red-haired boy clenched his teeth to the crunch, mentally cursing his family's poverty. The blue-haired girl nearby didn't even blink. The youth noticed that the ally on the blue mollusk was swaying and barely keeping balance. He ordered the blonde to catch him from falling, and the blonde briefly nodded. At the command to start, the crimson monster under the youth suddenly dashed forward over the green water. Red projectiles rained down on the pale mask of the spirit. The youth threw his bone ant into the battle. The beast instantly crossed blades, blocking a series of fiery explosions. The swordsman sharply pushed off the mollusk, and with a shout brought down his blade. A blue streak struck directly at the red mark on the forehead of the mask. The space was torn apart by the harsh collision. An energy beam pierced through the stone face. The monster hissed eerily, spewing dazzling light from its jaws. The next moment, everything around was engulfed by a massive green explosion. The giant stone mask flared crimson under the strikes of sharp black spikes. Its ruby eye gleamed fiercely. The air instantly twisted into a bloody vortex, pulling the head inside, along with massive stones. The young man recognized the old trick, and wondered if the enemy repeated it to force them to strike from above. The black blade with fiery cracks mercilessly plunged into the white flesh, amid a desperate cry. "Don't!" Against the backdrop of the whirlpool, an armored warrior grew, caught the sword, and dryly said he would go for a frontal attack. His blade was instantly engulfed by a powerful blue flame. The shining energy phantom of the sword swiftly rushed towards the giant head, which was already tightly bound by harsh red shackles. The creature jerked wildly in panic. The destructive blue tornado smashed the monster with a blow right on the crown. The blue-haired youth barely stayed on his feet, shielding himself with his hand from the furious gust of wind. The armored warrior stood firm in the midst of the storm, continuing to fill the weapon with energy. With a sharp whistle, he took off from the spot, turning into a blurred white shadow. A dazzling flash of the blue blade tore through the darkness, right before the huge predatory eyes. The warrior in black armor caught the weapon, and with a roar, "Tiger!" chopped down. A giant pillar of blue energy cut through the darkness. A devastating explosion. Falling, it sounded in the air, while the chopped giant structure flew into the smoky abyss. The heated fragments slowly crumbled into pieces. When the dust settled, it turned out that a frog had been sitting inside the lotus all this time. The creature bulged its red eyes and fiercely opened its jaws, striking sharp violet beams in all directions. A powerful shockwave instantly threw the boy in the white cloak high up. Li Xuan helplessly struggled in the vortex of the violet portal. A dazzling column of golden fire struck right beside him, accompanied by a roar. Titan's fist. Black energy slammed into the flames with force, and the shockwave threw the youth away. The savior stood unwavering on the spiked back of the monster, directing a column of dazzling light into the sky. The enemy's strike cruelly pierced the blue flying beast, and the hero commanded Xu Mian Tu to immediately pick up Li Xuan. He said he would deal with this frog himself, focusing intently on the target. Xu Mian Tu tensed on the hexagonal shield below, and briefly confirmed the order. The hero instantly sprang from his place, running along the giant horn as if on a springboard. The gigantic shadow frog opened its jaws, desperately spitting out a wave of poison and a devastating beam. He only smiled boldly, slipping through the attack in a flash. In the monster's red eyes, animal terror froze. The next moment, the space shook from a powerful, fiery explosion. The hero calmly exhaled that it was all over, turning his back to the fresh puddle of blood on the stone pattern. Stunned, Li Xuan continued his fall, now straight towards the reliable barrier of his partner. Li Xuan looked up at him in shock. The enemy snarled fiercely, and his pupils flashed red, as if to say, he should not be blamed. Next to him, the girl calmly ignited blue flames in her palms. Suddenly, she tensed sharply. A strong grip intercepted her hand. Zhou Wen, on the wings of energy, snatched Li Xuan from falling into the green abyss. "You saved me again," the blue-haired one exhaled, covering his eyes. Both boys confidently landed right in front of the traitor. He trembled with rage, not understanding how they managed to hide the flying companion. Zhou Wen coldly rebuked him. The cheap acting with fake help was too obvious. Without unnecessary words, Li Xuan punched the traitor right in the face. From the powerful blow, he flew several meters away with a scream. "Why?" Li Xuan roared over the beaten man, but he only spat out blood and croaked maliciously that the second brother Li Mobai had long bought all his entourage. The defeated body began to dissolve into the air in white smoke. The blonde with a crazy grin shouted that they would all die together, and instantly blew up the ground around the heroes with a stream of destructive green energy. The blue-haired one only managed to curse mentally, when suddenly they were covered by a saving dome of blue light. A girl intervened. She calmly stepped forward, summoning behind her a powerful winged spirit. Investigation room of Xi'an University. The investigator nodded dryly. The situation is clarified. You may go. Zhou Wen and his blue-haired companion silently walked down the bright corridor. The blue-haired one sighed bitterly. Could he be such a bad person that acquaintances betray him one after another and try to kill him? Zhou Wen tensed. Why does the second brother hate him so fiercely and only think about how to kill him? The blue-haired one did not slow his pace. After the death of the elder brother, he did not interfere in family affairs, leaving them to Li Mobai, and simply enjoyed the status of the young master. Then why destroy him if there is no power struggle? The boy calmly replied that the matter was not about the power of the Li family at all. Zhou Wen stopped confusedly, asking what then was the reason. Echoing footsteps. The blue-haired one froze with a heavy look. Suddenly he cut off the conversation. It was too awkward to talk here, and walked on. The dull clatter of cans. Zhou Wen shouted irritably at the guest, who had unceremoniously sprawled on the floor of his room and was opening another drink. He took a casual sip and asked if Zhou Wen understood the difference between levels. A monstrous dark night towered over the world, embodying the absolute evolution of power, from mortal to unreachable mythical level. In the darkness, a huge crimson eye flashed predatory. He explained that with each new level, the gap in power grows larger until it becomes an insurmountable abyss. The blue-haired man squinted and asked how it was even possible to destroy the first creature of such a rank. The young man looked up from his glass in surprise, since this victory had long been described in all textbooks. According to legend, the 6 first epic heroes continuously attacked the cosmic serpent for 3 days and 3 nights. The blue-haired man clenched a can in his hand and disdainfully said that all of this was complete nonsense. But the blue-haired man cut in, saying that even 100 fighters would not have been enough to defeat the higher monster. The real reason for the victory was that the heroes already had mythical companions. The young man was stuck in a logical paradox, since a mythical companion can only be summoned after killing a mythical monster. Then the blue-haired one raised a finger and calmly named the solution: divine blessing. Someone unknown and almighty simply handed the people the key to victory. In their hands were placed the living embryos of mythical beasts. The young man skeptically sat down on the floor and waved it off, calling the story about the blessing an ordinary invention without evidence. Li Xuan lazily opened a can and told about the secret department of the Commonwealth, created to search for missing heroes. Moreover, it was this department that allowed certain chosen ones to receive the same gift. The interlocutor thoughtfully rubbed his chin. It turns out the divine blessing was not just a simple invention. While Li Xuan was drinking, the boy tensed, trying to understand the reason for such sudden frankness. Suddenly he was enlightened. Could it be that you... He gasped in shock, not taking his eyes off him. Li Xuan closed his eyes with a barely noticeable smile. He confirmed the guess. The old man chose him as the first heir of the Li family blessing, and Li Mobai would be able to seize this place. Only if he kills me, he cut off sharply, imitating a slit throat with his finger. The young man slept carelessly, sprawled on his own bed. The young man silently sat on the sofa with his phone. An acquaintance warned him to be more cautious. He had already ruined the plans of the second brother several times, and he could very well pay attention to him, so the boy decided to become stronger as soon as possible. The game system issued a red warning. His pet was hungry and demanded blood. The boy sighed resignedly. Companions cost a fortune, but otherwise, the pet would not have grown. Resigned, he sent his avatar on another clearing of the dark dungeon. "I will attack head-on." Suddenly a shout sounded from the video. 3 boys watched the monitor intently. A dazzling magical explosion flashed on the screen. The viewers sighed in disappointment. Due to a vile betrayal in the team, Zhou Wen and Li Xuan still could not destroy the Lotus Core. The video had already spread across the network, and a group of girls on the street squealed with excitement at Li Xuan's coolness. They pestered their friend Wei Yan, begging for an introduction to her younger brother. Meanwhile, the young man on the sofa paused the video, capturing an epic shot of a stern fighter in the middle of a bloodied hall. He only quietly grunted. In the Special Investigation Group's office of the Commonwealth, work was in full swing. Zhou Wen's dossier spun on the hologram. Investigators analyzed how he dodged the attack of a poisonous moon frog and destroyed it with a single blow. The long-haired investigator in dark glasses grimly noted that the young man pulled this off with sheer physical strength, without a drop of spiritual energy. His partner Li Si tensed in amazement. It turned out the boy was using an extremely unconventional cultivation method. Intelligence reported that Zhou practiced only the basic meditation through suffering, which simply cannot produce such combat results. The man recalled their brief meeting in the night city. At that time, the youth's skin emitted a soft, jade glow, the main sign of this technique. But now it has completely disappeared, he said sharply. Li Si suggested that the boy was secretly retrained by someone from the powerful An family. But the chief already knew another name. Far from here, the legendary Jin Daoshen played with flames. He felt the immortality sutra weakening in his body, and with predatory curiosity pondered the boy's abilities. The investigator objected. The youth had met the stepmother only a few days ago, and even if she had given him advanced techniques, he simply wouldn't have had time to master them. The investigator finally dismissed the option involving the An family. Everything indicated that it was this dangerous old man standing behind the youth. Heading to the exit, he ordered to fabricate a conspiracy between Zhou Wen and Jin Daoshen at all costs, in order to obtain an arrest warrant and harshly extract the whole truth. The girl confirmed the order on the terminal, mentally promising to personally take care of the boy during the interrogation. The woman in a strict suit thoughtfully touched her lips, studying the youth's face on the glowing holographic screen. The red-haired woman anxiously asked whether the An family would defend Zhou Wen from their investigation. Her partner calmly walked down the corridor and assured that with the interregional arrest warrant, no one would interfere with them. He adjusted his glasses, adding that the An family themselves were at odds with the boy over the divine blessing, so they would not help him. Meanwhile, the blue-haired An Jing froze before the massive doors. She indignantly blurted out to her mother that Zhou Wen's talent alone was insufficient to fight for the inheritance. The mother calmly reminded her how the boy gave up and immersed himself in games after a minor failure, then abruptly ended the conversation. Everything was already decided. The girl frowned angrily and vowed to prove at any cost that she was much better. Someone's hand decisively reached for the door. An Jing burst into the room, catching Zhou Wen with a smartphone in his hands. An Jing? He stared in surprise at the unexpected guest. The girl declared from the threshold that the shooting at the sun method was real, and he could safely practice it. Zhou Wen sighed mentally, because he still couldn't use the skill, while the girl continued to insist on checking the flash drive with Uncle Feng. The boy fell silent, in confusion. He awkwardly scratched the back of his head, and frankly asked why she had given him this technique at all. The girl sharply poked him with her finger, throwing a direct challenge. She was going to prove her superiority. She was sure that he was still boiling with rage over that shameful school defeat. The boy only raised his hands peacefully. No offense. Only sincere admiration for her. Her fists involuntarily clenched at such calmness. The girl was openly annoyed that he did not crave revenge after the public defeat. She saw his abilities in the fight with Lotus and now issued an ultimatum. In 3 months, he must reach the legendary level, where she would wait for the decisive duel. The boy lazily suggested surrendering right now, but instantly received a fierce jerk by the collar. Escaping was impossible. Having let him go, she went up the stairs, dryly adding that he should not hesitate to ask for spiritual power crystal. This time, I will not spare you, she threw over her shoulder. The girl left, leaving him in complete silence. He pondered confusedly. Why would a genius who achieved the legendary rank at 13 fight so desperately with an ordinary mortal? Sighing that he did not understand her at all, the young man crouched by the door to tie up the garbage bags left behind by Li Xuan. Walking down the empty corridor, he thoughtfully stared at his device. Suddenly the screen was cut by a dazzling red flash. The boy's eyes widened in shock. Suddenly the ground was pierced by dazzling golden rays. The armored monster triumphantly clenched in its jaws, the shining egg with the lotus of the heart of Buddha. The young man briskly stomped his foot, moving forward with his new companion. He looked at the hologram with satisfaction, glad that Li Xuan had not lied about the usefulness of this companion. Joy instantly vanished due to a red system warning. The silver-winged ant was literally starving to death. In the real world, the boy sighed irritably over his smartphone and tapped the screen to feed resources. The game space was torn apart by a dazzling rainbow whirlwind of evolution. He tensed, sincerely hoping that this time, the pet would grow at least a little. The light went out, and from there flew out an absolutely identical tiny insect. The gamer wearily rubbed his temple. This little one had already eaten 2 death-level eggs, but remained at the initial stage. It became obvious that cheap feed hardly affected a creature of legendary class. He thoughtfully rubbed his chin. The skeleton general could quickly get legendary loot, but it was unknown how much spiritual power that would require. Leaning back on the bed, the young man plunged into thoughts. The situation with An Jing weighed on him, and the studied Lost Sutra of Immortality prevented further leveling, and completely blocked other skills. This hopelessness even gave him a headache. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a persistent knocking. He sharply clicked the lock, tensing from the unexpected visit. A brazen guy with dreads and massive chains around his neck appeared on the doorstep, smiling and asking if the junior student remembered him. The blue-haired one immediately recognized Gao Yan and frowned, directly asking what he needed. The guest spread his hands conciliatorily, implying he came specifically to apologize for the past. However, this only made the guy wary. He silently wondered what he was really planning. The guest insisted that without a fight, people do not recognize each other, and therefore suggested forgetting old grievances. Gao Yan extended his hand for reconciliation. Instead of a handshake, the blue-haired one turned around and went back to finish his game, forcing the guest to panic and cling to the door, begging him to listen. The confession that this was not just a courtesy visit made the guy stop with interest. The even light of the lamps illuminated the spacious room. Gao Yan led him inside and waved to another young man, Hai Fen, reporting that he had brought the target. He briefly thanked with a barely noticeable predatory smile. Suddenly, the air was torn apart by sharp, blood-red flashes of energy. A giant dark aura burst out and hovered over the blue-haired one, ready to crush him on the spot. But he didn't even flinch, only calmly said, "If you wanted to fight, you should have said so right away." A sharp snap of fingers sounded, and the stranger laughed heartily, openly admiring his impressive cold-bloodedness. The young man really didn't even flinch, standing unshaken in the midst of the furious whirl of red energy blades. The attack subsided, and the silver-haired Hui Haifen came forward. He extended his hand conciliatorily, apologized for the rough test, and immediately offered to join his team to destroy the Lotus of the Heart of Buddha. Hui Haifen warmly extended his hand, offering a place on the team to kill the Lotus. Zhou Wen didn't even take his hands out of his pockets. Why me? Hyphen slowly moved forward and admitted that he had carefully studied the video of their previous fight. He sharply pointed a finger at Zhou Wen. What impressed him most was his ability to command. The university is full of strong fighters, but the ability to see the full picture of the fight is truly rare. The senior student laid out the boy's entire tactic in detail, how he calculated the partner's fall location, and caught the perfect moment to strike the poisonous frog. The conditions were ideal. No need to climb into the water, just enough to control the trainees from a safe distance. But Zhou Wen refused. He did not want to mess with arrogant students, preferring simply to finish off the boss in the game. Haifen's dreadlocked partner pressed aggressively, reminding about their group's elite status, but Zhou Wen coldly cut him off, saying he was not interested. The dreadlocked one even gritted his teeth from such disrespect. Zhou Wen silently turned toward the exit. "Wait," broke the silence. Hyphen smiled slyly and suggested the boy name the condition himself, and immediately voiced his own bet, an egg of a legendary-level trainee. His partner almost shouted, eyes wide with shock. Zhou Wen brazenly smiled right in the big guy's face and declared that for his help, he demanded an egg with a legendary-level companion. The big guy boiled with such greed. After all, the boy only needed to safely control monsters from the back row. Instead of excuses, Zhou Wen coldly cut off, saying the conditions were named, and whether to agree or not was their business. Their leader, with silver hair, sharply interrupted the argument. He calmly clarified if there were any special requirements for the egg, to which Zhou Wen indifferently replied that for him, it was just food. Without unnecessary words, the silver-haired man threw him the artifact and declared that the boy was now on the team. Zhou Wen caught the prey, still not believing that he had gotten what he wanted so easily. The silver-haired man extended his fist. They bumped fists. Walking away, the big guy couldn't help but ask Hyphen how he could just give a valuable poisonous bee to some Zhou Wen. Hyphen seriously replied that during the last fight with the Lotus, he felt something strange. The boy fought as if he had already studied all the monster's moves in advance. Then he laughed carefreely and threw his hands behind his head. No matter what, Extra insurance wouldn't hurt them. Meanwhile, in the empty room, a bright light flashed. Zhou Wen activated the summoning, and from the magical vortex, the very same huge red bee materialized before him. The boy tossed the strange patterned egg in his hand, and with a slight smile, announced that it was time to start. His red companion joyfully stretched out to the hand and swallowed the treat. Suddenly, a dazzling fiery vortex tore through the space, and the young man froze before the flames, shockingly realizing evolution had begun. In the middle of the room, a dazzling fiery whirlwind suddenly flared up. From the roaring flames, a predatory gaze of green eyes and a strange white mark on the forehead emerged. A moment, and the sharp blade of the armored tail sliced through the fiery storm. The creature roared deafeningly, spreading its wings wide. The fire dispersed, revealing a gigantic predatory insect in massive crimson armor with sharp spikes. The young man calmly examined the pet. After merging, the ant clearly acquired dangerous traits of a poisonous bee. Clicking on the tablet, the boy assumed that a deep mutation occurred due to the crossing of two insects, not ordinary evolution. The blue screen displayed insane numbers. The flying ant reached a legendary level, and its speed and spiritual power almost broke the absolute limit. The young man's gaze stunnedly stopped at the name of the new skill. The description dispelled all doubts. Magic Light Needle turned out to be a deadly, long-range attack, capable of piercing the enemy with a supersonic energy charge. Grinning widely, the boy happily slapped the giant insect on the head. With such a trump card, the bloody lotus of Buddha's heart was doomed. A thick drop of blood fell on the blue digital panel. A powerful gust of wind struck the floor as a gigantic battle ant menacingly hovered right above its master. The youth's eyes flashed dangerously, and he sharply threw the pet into battle. The ant, like a lightning torpedo, attacked the bizarre white enemy, slicing bloody, watery vortices around it. A hail of crimson energy blades descended from the sky. The water surface was torn apart by a series of powerful explosions. From there, a red predator emerged like lightning, rushing straight at the white drone. It barely managed to dive, escaping the stormy fire that whistled right over its head. The predator froze. It smoothly spread its transparent wings, hovering over the emerald water. Noticing the target, the monster released sharp blades and plunged down like a stone. The drone jerked, but the enemy had already landed right on its back. The black spearhead pierced the strong armor with a swing. Without wasting a second, the predator struck the breach with a blue laser. A blinding flash rang out with a deafening hiss. The shock wave from the colossal explosion swept away everything in its path. "Goo, you?" the white robot exclaimed in surprise, unable to comprehend the defeat, and the Crimson Hunter had already jumped aside, leaving behind only a blurred, neon trail. The red sphere sliced through the air with a whistle. Its shell cracked apart with a crash, revealing a pale mask with a crystal on the forehead. The monster opened its jaws and spat out a dense violet beam. The crimson armored beetle charged straight into the attack. With a shower of sparks, it harshly cut through the enemy volley with its blade. A quick red flash flickered in the air. A sharp thorn pierced through the monster's body, knocking out a fountain of black liquid from it. Flying higher, the beetle flashed in the sky with a bright light cross. A gigantic vertical beam thunderously imprinted the enemy into the rocks. The earth cracked in half, spewing destructive fiery explosions from the depths. Suddenly, the beetle's green eye sharply narrowed. The battle was not over yet. The armored wasp cut through the dense purple cloud like lightning. Ahead, a colossal explosion thundered, and the boy sighed in disappointment. Due to the lotus's death, all valuable trophies could simply sink to the bottom. Suddenly, his assistant wasp hissed in front of him. With a clink, she threw the saved crimson crystal at his feet. The boy's eyes lit up. He realized that this skill was the true key to entering the small temple. Without hesitation, he activated absorption, and the stone flared red. The body was instantly engulfed in burning crimson flames. He grabbed his chest, breathing heavily from the unbearable heat. He had to grit his teeth and endure the fiery agony with his last strength. Finally, the phone beeped with a message. The basic skill successfully evolved into Bloody Zen. The smoke dispersed. The boy pulled off his soaking wet clothes, glad that he hadn't burned alive at all. Suddenly, his body was again pierced by pulsating red lines. Sitting on the bed, he contentedly assessed the new aura. Now the spiritual power was guaranteed to last for half an hour. The red aura blazed around the body. He triumphantly clenched his fist, ready to explore the small Buddha temple. Bloody drops dissolved into the darkness, revealing a view of the majestic stone bridge of the lost underground city. The youth rushed forward over the wide slabs, kicking up fog with his feet. His guess was confirmed. Bloody Zen reliably blocked the dangerous energy of this zone. Echoing footsteps broke the silence. He froze before the gigantic ancient arch with the inscription, "Small Temple of Buddha." A chill ran down his spine at the thought of whether mighty spatial monsters were lurking here. However, he boldly stepped onto the temple grounds, surrounded by red lights. Strangely, the courtyard turned out to be completely empty. Suddenly, around the corner, he stopped abruptly. Before him stood a massive stone stele, glowing with the ancient text of the short Prajnaparamita. The young man recognized the name, Short Prajnaparamita, and recalled legends about the great sutra that once came from the West. The young man pondered deeply. If the full version of this manuscript was considered a legendary, epic-level technique, then what secrets did this short one hold? At that moment, the hieroglyphs on the stone suddenly distorted, pulling space into a magical vortex. The boy screamed wildly and recoiled as the massive stone slab suddenly exploded with a dazzling vortex of red runes. His head seemed to split in half. He convulsively grabbed his hair, trying to understand what kind of devilry this was. The boy sharply raised his hands. A bizarre seal flared up like fire on his chest. Energy exploded in a red wave, and the unbearable pressure suddenly disappeared. He stared in shock at the stone tablet, trying to comprehend the secret of the Sutra of Immortality, which had just stopped tearing his body apart. Joy instantly turned into panic. His spiritual power gauge had already fallen by half. The young man sprang from his place. He froze before the closed gate of the small temple of Buddha. The heavy doors suddenly creaked open, releasing dazzling blue light outside. The young man stepped onto the threshold, finding himself under the watch of a gigantic silhouette. From the darkness, the demonic fanged face of the statue grinned at him. He had just been surprised by the appearance of an unusual three-faced idol when a deadly vortex flared behind his back and tore him to pieces. On the smartphone screen, the inscription, "Game Over," glowed coldly. The player tore himself away from the screen, realizing that to enter the temple, he would have to solve the harsh rules of the game. Looking at the virtual monsters, he only now felt respect for the ancestors who once carved this path, risking their only true life. He bit his finger, assessing the situation. Even the bloody Zen did not let him into the temple, and without the lost sutra, the found steel with the cultivation method was useless. The young man waved his hand. Memorizing that text wouldn't hurt anyway, and headed to the temple gate. His game avatar froze in front of the huge stone slab. The symbols flashed green, and the boy was already re-photographing them on his smartphone, rejoicing that the text turned out to be easy to memorize. Now it was only left to manage to get the character out of the location before the spiritual power was exhausted, and the photos could be studied as much as desired. The sun slowly rose over the megalopolis. He yawned tiredly, having stayed on the phone until dawn. In the game, the avatar again stood before the stele. The long text was finally memorized, down to the last hieroglyph. At that very moment, the space around exploded with streams of aura. He stared in shock at his game hands. The spiritual power swirled in the body in a mad, shining vortex. He instantly recognized this circulation. It was the short Prajnaparamita. In the real world, he stunnedly raised his hand. The fingers were glowing, because the mighty method activated by itself, just from memory. He remained lying on the bed, mesmerized, looking at his sparkling palm. He collapsed onto the bed, brushing off all problems. First, he needed to get a good sleep. In a moment, the boy was already sound asleep. But while he was resting, mysterious golden runes suddenly flared brightly on his bare back. The silence of the bright bathroom was broken by a surprised exclamation. Zhou Wen stared at himself in confusion. His skin was literally peeling off. The old epidermis was falling off in pieces onto the floor. Freezing before the mirror in a pulsating blue aura, he guessed that this was the effect of the short Prajnaparamita. Throwing on a towel, the boy went out into the room. The status window shocked him. Despite the mortal class, his physical stats had jumped to 11. He understood nothing. The basic technique remained the same, but the body limit had been broken. There could be no mistakes. He clearly felt the short Prajnaparamita circulating through his body. Could it be? A wild guess flashed through his mind. His figure was once again enveloped by a powerful pillar of blue energy. Suddenly the aura split, flashing with golden light as well. The boy stared at his hands in shock. He had learned to switch between two different methods, whose energies usually destroy the user when combined. Zhou Wen thoughtfully rubbed his chin, realizing that the strongest techniques are the worst compatible with each other. The phone on the table suddenly vibrated. Zhou Wen picked up the receiver and heard the tense voice of his partner. The team had been waiting for him by the lotus pond for a long time. A chill ran down his spine. The young man had completely forgotten about it. And in the underground cave, a battle was already raging. Someone had unleashed water vines on the enemy. Thick green stems tightly entwined the stone pillar. Above the lotus pulsed a black cocoon, and Zhou Wen, who barely managed to rush over, commanded his familiars to tear apart the poisonous frog before it hatched. Two demonic birds fell like stones onto the target. The dark sphere trembled anxiously. A crimson flash cruelly cut through the space above the altar. The strike was perfect, and Zhou Wen shouted for everyone to immediately retreat 20 meters. The partner in the cap was stunned. Why retreat if the target was almost finished? "Get out of the way, I'll kill him," he barked, and rushed headlong toward the cocoon. At that moment, the raven unleashed a shower of bloody blades. Dozens of sharp crimson blades pierced the air and crashed into the ground with a devastating roar. The bloody raven suddenly froze. Its eyes flared with horror at the inevitable. A powerful crimson explosion tore the space to pieces. Silence fell. The boy in the cap slammed on the brakes, staring in shock at the completely calm Zhou Wen. Zhou nervously wiped the sweat and muttered that the raven died not because of him, so he was not going to pay for the damages. Senior student hurriedly waved his hands, apologizing for his haste, while the rest of the team approached with open admiration for the newcomer. The remnants of Buddha's ancient lotus shattered with a rumble into pieces in the whirl of green energy. Meanwhile, in the cave, a blond man greeted teacher Wan Fei with a new student. Zhou Wen clearly knew about the self-destruction of the lotus, which had just taken 5 legendary monsters with it. The man assumed that the An family leaked the information, but Wan Fei rejected this idea. Due to the open conflict, the An children would never share secrets with him. She adjusted her glasses and smiled slyly, entrusting to dig up more about the boy. It would be a great favor for the An family matriarch. Sharp black spikes suddenly burst out from the underground lotus pond. Deadly dark whirlwinds closed around the target in the very center of the arena. The battle-winged ant maneuvered lightning fast between massive attacks. A wide streak of blue energy cut through the space with a terrible rumble. The insect instantly crossed its blades, generating a devastating red strike. The surface of the water was torn apart by a giant explosion of pink flame. The boy calmly sat on the floor with his phone and stated that he had completely figured out the enemy attack patterns, so finishing off the boss was now easier than ever. Suddenly, the screen flashed brightly with a system notification. In a cloud of pixelated smoke, a funny red and white companion egg popped out joyfully. The young man squinted thoughtfully, carefully examining the acquired loot. The game congratulated him on obtaining a legendary-level pet, whose base stats really seemed quite decent. But he quickly became embarrassed and sighed in disappointment. Unlike the boss with a bunch of useful abilities, this little one had only one, and frankly a pathetic skill at that. He figured that raising the creature would drain all his energy, and the lotus would still remain at the initial stage. Then another thought flashed through his mind: to try fusion. System windows glowed like a verdict. The chance of fusing the item with the bone ant was 1.6%, and with the silver wing, a meager 3. The boy exhaled irritably, thinking it would have been simpler to just write about the impossibility of the operation right away. Instead, the system offered an alternative: to feed the item to the silver wing ant. Sitting on the bed, he pondered whether his pet could grow even more from such nourishment. Doubts quickly vanished, and his finger decisively pressed the button. The space flashed with crimson light, revealing a giant armored insect to the gaze. The boy shouted in disappointment. The ant had not changed at all, and had not grown a bit. Later, releasing wings made of red energy, he dashed at a mad speed towards the small Buddha temple. A sudden flash of yellow aura made him brake sharply. Exclaiming a quick apology for the intrusion, he swiftly jumped into the dark hall. He softly landed in the darkness of the hall. A glance at the phone screen brought a satisfied smile. The red mantra successfully overcame the barrier and led him inside. In the thick darkness lurked a creepy, 4-armed statue. Examining it up close, he only scratched the back of his head in confusion, not understanding which bizarre Buddha it was dedicated to at all. From the darkness came a short, raised. A golden magic circle suddenly flashed under his feet. An invisible force threw the boy high into the air. He shrank in panic, expecting another instant death. But instead of a fatal blow, 2 fiery spheres swirled around. Inside the vortex of energy pulsed a shining egg. The air was cut by a system screen. A mighty Buddhist traveler offered to accept his gift. The boy immediately suspected a trap, since companions are not given away for free. The attempt to check the characteristics failed. The system reliably concealed the data. Only one way remained to find out the truth, and he carefully took the find in his hands. Already at home, he collapsed exhausted on the floor, looking at the screen in shock. The mythical beast was successfully bred. "What the hell? I didn't agree," he shouted furiously, throwing the phone away. The room was torn apart by a flash of crimson energy, from which emerged a gigantic fiery lion of stunning spiritual power. The boy was instantly pierced by hellish pain. If last time he barely survived after a contract with the legendary pet, then the mythical monster would surely tear him to pieces. Clenching his bloodied teeth, he desperately hissed a curse. His hand weakly reached into the bloody whirlpool, while the last absurd thought flashed through his mind. It seems he will become the first person in the world truly killed by a video game. The boy weakly spread his arms on the floor, gasping heavily for air. He survived, although the ritual sucked a lot of blood from him and completely drained his spiritual energy. Suddenly, a fluffy, long-eared little animal jumped out before him with a slight glow. The boy stared in shock at the cute creature, not believing that this was Titan. A thought flashed in his mind. Could this be the mythical harbinger of destruction? He carefully held the baby, then reached for his smartphone. The holographic screen displayed the status, initial stage of mortal level, but all characteristics equaled 11, and the arsenal had as many as 4 powerful skills. He froze in the semi-darkness of the room. These numbers broke the ceiling of the absolute maximum for the mortal rank. The little animal joyfully cuddled while sweat rolled down the boy's face from the realization of the impossible. The system stubbornly congratulated on the successful summoning, although he clearly remembered that the message initially promised a creature of mythical level. He focused and frowned. Perhaps the initial stage status meant that this tiny one could be raised from 0, like the flying ant. Legends describe Titan as a majestic white bodhisattva dog, capable of hearing any truth in the world. "I didn't imagine him like this," the boy sighed resignedly, looking at the funny creature barking loudly on the carpet. "Titan, transformation," he commanded, and the baby's body was instantly engulfed in a dazzling flame of energy. His ear suddenly caught a sharp signal. The boy froze in the middle of the room, feeling the sound waves literally cutting through the space around him. His hearing sharpened so much that he easily picked up random conversations of people far down the street. Suddenly he turned pale. Through the city noise came a quiet, plaintive sobbing of Anjin. The boy felt embarrassed and tried to dismiss these sounds so as not to feel like a pervert eavesdropping on girls. But behind the wall, crying and moaning from unbearable pain sounded again. His fists thundered against the neighboring door. He called out anxiously to his friend, at the same time realizing that frequent use of such abilities could simply drive one insane. In response, only dead silence. Tension instantly rose, and the thought of the worst flashed through his mind. The boy sharply stepped back, preparing to lunge. With all his might, he flew shoulder first into the obstacle. The powerful blow even broke the special break-resistant door. On the floor sat a shocked An Jing, who could only think about how he even managed to hear her. She shrank back in tears, horrified at the thought that Zhou Wen might see her in such a miserable state. The tension eased when the pounding on the massive door suddenly stopped. The girl exhaled with relief and collapsed weakly onto the floor, hoping he had left. At that very moment, the window shattered into pieces. Zhou Wen flew into the room. She froze in shock. The boy calmly straightened up among the shards of glass and quietly asked if everything was all right. Recovering, she embarrassedly screamed, demanding an explanation for such a dramatic entrance. Zhou Wen just awkwardly scratched the back of his head. She hadn't opened the door, so he feared the worst. He immediately reached for the phone to call a doctor, but the girl panicked and forbade him to do so. Turning away, she tried to justify her condition by a sudden exacerbation of an old illness. The boy squinted suspiciously, clearly not believing this story. For such frank doubts, a mug instantly flew into his head. Within a second, Zhou Wen found himself in the corridor in front of closed doors. Rubbing his face, he confusedly realized that he had clearly done something wrong. The girl helplessly leaned her back against the closed doors. She slowly slid down them. Hugging her knees, she hid her burning face in her clothes and mentally called him a fool. A handful of red dates splashed into the boiling water. Zhou Wen gloomily looked at the brew, hoping that the drink would at least somewhat restore the lost blood. He silently stood by the stove in a kitchen apron. The table vibrated from the call. A friend was urging him to the first day of classes, where the recruitment for student clubs was just starting. Wen pressed the phone to his ear, and holding a ladle with hot broth, cut off, saying he was not going to join anywhere. The friend in the cap suggested creating their own club, but Wen refused again. The game gave him much faster development. The guy did not back down and reminded that for university tasks, a team would still be needed, and with their own club they wouldn't have to ask anyone for help. The last argument hit below the belt. The friend recalled what happened at the school exam. Wen fell silent. After a short pause, he still gave in, but noted that you can't form a club with just 2 people. The friend smiled happily. That's exactly why they were going to scour the campus now. Meanwhile, at the central square of the university, there was no room to drop an apple because of the crowd. Students were endlessly bustling back and forth, slipping past each other in the general hustle. Someone was hurrying. Someone was being pushed in the shoulder. The square buzzed like a beehive. Zhou Wen was thoughtfully walking through the crowded crowd. "Zhou Wen, over here," his friend in a cap called out joyfully. As soon as they caught up, the girl nearby immediately became interested in his unusual bag. Zhou calmly took out a thermos with date tea, which seriously scared his friend with possible side effects. The girl greeted him kindly, and the boy responded with a brief nod. The girl immediately got down to business and offered him to join the Wei Yan Club. Suddenly, 3 striking senior students blocked the way, but the friend in the cap quickly intervened. He indignantly pulled Zhou Wen aside, although he himself was almost drooling over the beauties. Zhou awkwardly scratched his neck and declined the seniors. He had already promised Xuan to create his own club. Hearing this, the girl nearby smiled understandingly. She suggested joining forces on future tasks, while the rejected students dispersed. The boy in the cap happily supported the idea, and the trio set off across the wide square. A little later, the friend slyly squinted, teasing Zhou Wen about the lost chance to be among the beauties. Zhou Wen stopped joking, reminding that they were going to found a club, but so far hadn't lifted a finger. The boy in the cap looked anxiously at the noisy crowd. If they delayed, the upperclassmen would quickly sort out all the freshmen. He shrugged. Right now they still can't register because freshmen need to study for a whole month and find 5 more people to create the club. Zhou Wen asked quietly why they even came here then, to which his friend shamelessly grinned. Of course, to look at the beauties. Zhou irritably tugged the joker by the collar, but their quarrel was suddenly interrupted by someone's footsteps. "Zhou Wen," a serious female voice sounded from behind. He turned around in surprise. In front of him stood a red-haired girl, accompanied by a burly blonde man, who immediately said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. On the roof of the high-rise, they were met by 2 people, red-haired Fan Josie and her burly companion. Zhou Wen calmly noted that they also enrolled in Xi'an. What a coincidence. The boy in the cap familiarly hung on Zhou Wen's neck, asking about the beauty, to which he explained they all studied together in high school. The friend was surprised why he didn't remember her at all, but Zhou Wen mercilessly reminded him of his constant truancy. Without wasting time, the boy suggested to the girl to join their future club, and she instantly agreed. He was a bit taken aback by such speed, and warned that submitting an application would only be possible in a month. Fan Josie smiled gently. They would wait. She lowered her gaze and moved forward. The girl suddenly stopped in front of Zhou Wen and bowed low, begging forgiveness for once refusing to take him into the team during the exam. Her face darkened. She still blamed herself for the fact that he could have failed because of her. The boy in the cap silently squinted, suddenly realizing that she had entered this academy solely for Zhou Wen. Zhou Wen calmly replied that he did not blame them for the past. The blonde behind laughed with relief and waved his hands, assuring that back then they simply had no choice. The meeting ended quickly. The boy in the cap sent everyone home to get some rest before tomorrow's classes. The young man anxiously asked if the combat skills test would take place in the city of Buda. He was immediately reassured. No one would throw freshmen into a recently opened area full of hidden threats. The red-haired girl explained that the university would choose one of the 4 safe zones on the campus. The essence of the test is simple: to kill spatial creatures. The more corpses, the higher the rating. The young man was confused, not understanding how they knew so much. The girl only blinked in surprise, asking if he didn't read the university's spatial forum at all. On the way back, he was digesting the information he had heard. This global network was created by the Commonwealth. Here, military and civilians freely exchange data without identity verification. At the Guid school, he was not interested in such things, but here, in Xi'an, all communication went through this resource. He would have to figure out how it worked. He was thoughtfully looking at the phone screen when very close by it sounded, "Hi, were you also accepted for special reasons?" The young man sharply looked around, trying to understand who had just spoken to him. The stranger smiled friendly, attracting Zhou Wen's attention. The boy named himself somewhat confusedly and explained that he lives on the 2nd floor. The girl beamed with joy. She had just moved into the 1st floor, introduced herself as Van Lu, and declared that now they were neighbors. Suddenly she looked around in confusion, The interlocutor had vanished without a trace. Only a hollow rumble came from the stairs. Van Lu remained standing alone, openly amazed at the eccentricities of the new acquaintance. On the sunlit bed lay a discarded bag with a toothy print and a phone. The interface of the spatial forum loaded on the monitor. He lazily scrolled the mouse wheel. The platform provided free access to data, where everyone, from students to random people, dumped information. Suddenly his gaze caught on the registration form. It did not require identity verification. A perfect security hole for those who have something to hide. And indeed, somewhere in a dirty alley, an unknown person in a hood was silently studying the smartphone screen. The forum operated a reward system, where earned points were freely convertible into valuable crystals and pet eggs. He leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. For ordinary posts, they paid pitiful pennies here, only a few points for 10,000 views. Paid content remained. But the platform was completely anonymous, and to make people pay, the account would first have to be seriously promoted. Moreover, universities and official structures also leaked information here, harshly driving prices down. He moved closer to the table again and stared at the empty screen. What should he post? His fingers thoughtfully tapped on the table, while the idea matured in his head. Exactly. He squinted slyly and pointed at the monitor, catching a brilliant idea. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, in a luxurious bright bedroom, a dark-haired girl was relaxedly drinking tea on the bed. Someone lazily scrolled through the student forum feed, reading the naive posts of freshmen. A dark-haired female teacher irritably browsed through this nonsense, sipping coffee in bed and dreaming of just beating up the juvenile idiots. Suddenly she froze, staring at the screen in shock. The app interface blinked blue. Someone put up for sale a guide to the small temple of Buddha for a crazy 20,000 points. The woman could not believe her eyes. This territory was strictly classified, and even most teachers had not heard of it. She hesitated. The post's author was a zero-level newbie and looked like a scammer, but the very knowledge of the secret location's name gave a chance to save the lives of many military intelligence officers. The finger decisively pressed the purchase button. The guide turned out to be a mockery. The author advised saving oneself with the absolutely useless skill heart calming, and at the end attached a smiley with advice not to enter the temple at all. The woman sighed disappointedly, scolding herself for being trusting. Meanwhile, in the gloomy corridors of the dungeon of the ancient imperial city, a red mechanical drone was rushing swiftly. A skeleton knight with a burning blue skull on a bony horse flew out towards it with a crash. The undead made a quick strike with a heavy black spear. The weapon struck the stone floor with terrible force. The skeleton froze in confusion, realizing the target had disappeared. The drone dived lightning fast from above, pinning the enemy to the ground with a powerful suppression field. And up close, it blasted the monster's skull with a devastating burst of blue energy. The enemy armor crumbled to sand, leaving only a glowing golden egg in the air. The boy sighed with relief. He had finally gotten the long-awaited companion. The youth threw another morsel to the pet, and it greedily gaped its jaws. However, the red flying ant did nothing but chew, ignoring the owner's request to grow at least a little. The hero realized that the protege was not developing due to incompatibility with the general of the skeletons, and decided to move further into the territory. He mounted an ant, and they swiftly flew over the tiled roofs of ancient buildings. The boy looked around in confusion, for the further he advanced, the stranger the complete disappearance of enemy skeletons seemed. Suddenly, the path was blocked by a giant wall of sand. Behind it rose a monumental stone tower with a flame at the top. The ancient imperial city of Ebotai. The youth stared at the screen in confusion, not understanding where this tower in the middle of the map had come from. According to local legend, this tower belonged to Ebo, the mighty son of the emperor, who turned into a living embodiment of flame. But in reality, the boy was calmly sitting in a dark room in front of a smartphone, wondering why the game geography did not match history textbooks at all. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp flash. From the virtual steps, a dazzling, fiery bird burst directly onto the screen. In the game itself, his tiny avatar barely dodged the burning blade of a giant winged insect. The monster froze for a moment, lowering its head fiercely. The fiery silhouette dived rapidly at the hero, causing him to curse in surprise. Without retreating, the avatar spun a powerful vortex of blue energy around himself. The shockwave burst forward, tearing the ground apart. Two elements collided harshly in the air. In the real world, the boy was covered in cold sweat. He realized in shock that his attack had simply cut through emptiness. A colossal, fiery explosion covered the virtual battlefield. Leaning back in his chair, he greedily drained a glass of water, trying to calm his breathing. Someone slammed a bloodied flask on the table with anger, demanding to repeat the experiment. Meanwhile, the young man desperately fled on phantom pink wings from the firebird, realizing that his skill did not allow him to fly safely high. The flame predator stubbornly did not fall behind. The young man figured out the monster's tactic. It always attacks the target closest to the tower, so he instantly decided to become live bait. He recalled his magical spirit and ran with all his might across the bare ground. The bird roared as it swooped down, catching up with him right on the wooden stairs. But the youth only smiled fiercely when a sharp blue beam pierced the monster through. It was his flying ant that timely fired a magical light needle. The smile instantly faded. The system did not issue any notification about the enemy's destruction. Without wasting a second, he rushed further up the stairs, eager to reach the top faster. But the sky above the tower flared up again. This time, two birds were already rushing to intercept. The youth shouted to the ant to distract them, and sharply accelerated. The mechanical insect fearlessly dashed towards the fiery predators. Powerful laser beams struck from its wings, attacking both enemies simultaneously. He dashed up the stairs, mentally praising himself for the successful maneuver. Suddenly, a wall of fire blocked the way. From there burst an endless flock of burning birds. The youth gritted his teeth and rushed forward. The finish was too close. With a desperate scream, he jumped straight into the flames to see the hidden. In the jump, he unleashed a devastating beam of blue energy on the enemies. The fire parted, revealing a gigantic burning hieroglyph. A moment, and a dazzling explosion sounded. On the smartphone screen appeared the cold inscription, "Game over." The young man froze in confusion, trying to understand the meaning of the scene hieroglyph, "Emperor." Before his eyes appeared the gigantic gates of a dungeon, created based on a real ancient city. Leaning back in the chair, he analyzed the strange fiery birds and tried to imagine the power of their boss. The Tower of the God of Fire hid a lot of secrets, but there was no strength left for a new attempt. Suddenly he was stunned. 2 notifications about a crazy reward of 40,000 points appeared on the monitor at once. Sitting in front of the monitor, he smiled with satisfaction. Everything looked like easy money. Suddenly his gaze froze in surprise. In the private chat, there was a message from a stranger who offered to talk about the small Buddha temple. His tense body literally breathed power. Meanwhile, the clock on the wall relentlessly counted down the seconds. Teacher Wan Fei nervously clenched her palms in anticipation. In the private chat, her unread message about the small Buddha temple hung, and this silence was already starting to press. A call from a familiar soldier brought good news. The informant's advice worked, but the identity of the mysterious savior still remained a mystery. Moreover, the stone stele at the entrance to the temple continued to cause a lot of problems. Wan Fei tensed, recalling that similar artifacts with cultivation methods had already been found in other regions. Legends said that whoever comprehended the ancient knowledge from the monolith would gain unprecedented power. The soldier's face hid in the shadow as he grimly added that a short Prajnaparamita was carved on this stele, and all the brave ones who dared to read its text eventually fell dead in pools of their own blood at the foot of the stone. Wan Fei silently froze. The soldier asked to extract information from her mysterious contact at any cost, and at that very moment, a new message broke the silence on the screen. The stranger finally replied, and to her direct question about the deadly technique, he calmly responded, "I know." The woman by the screen sighed in amazement. Her suspicions were confirmed, as the stranger knew the temple like the back of his hand. Meanwhile, Joe was bored in front of the monitor. A new message blinked in the chat. An unknown woman begged to reveal the training method, and offered any amount of money for it. The boy froze in confusion. Was there really anything special about his method? He leaned back, recalling how during the first attempt, he almost fainted from the wild pain in his head. Then, he was saved only by the lost sutra of immortality, which mysteriously flared up in his chest. Joe suddenly stood up. No, he would not reveal this secret to anyone. He simply closed the chat window. A clear morning came. In the spacious hall, people were already bustling. An acquaintance waved to him happily, wishing good morning. But instead of a cheerful student, he saw pale Joe with bags under his eyes, who could only silently endure the lectures about the harm of nightlife and lack of self-control. The exhausted hero with dark circles under his eyes greedily swallowed the red liquid, recalling how he lost a lot of blood last night in the ant cave. There, together with his bony partner, he was simply torn to pieces by a higher-level winged monster. The classroom door quietly slid open. A slender female lecturer confidently walked between the rows, greeting the students and calling everyone to silence. At the table sat a weary teacher who had spent the whole night in vain waiting for a message from some mysterious stranger. While the shabby hero stood nearby, a cheeky student laughed loudly across the class and jokingly called the lecturer his concubine. She just calmly stood up. Her glasses flashed fiercely. It was time to announce the exam rules. The conditions turned out to be suicidal: to form a squad in 10 days and destroy the most demonic general at the Hulao Pass. Exactly 1.5 minutes were given for the test, and failures faced immediate expulsion. The academy building shook from the mass scream of shocked students. Suddenly the vision dissipated, and the silence of the auditorium was cut by an outraged cry. The students panicked that the new task was beyond ordinary mortals. The female instructor calmly adjusted her glasses, coldly cutting off that there would be enough time for everyone to prepare. Standing before the hushed crowd, the woman announced the opening of the Hulao Pass for the next 10 days. A barely noticeable smile flickered on her face. She wished the students to survive and return after the exam in full. In the corridor, two friends tried to digest what they had heard. The Hulao Pass was an ancient battlefield where local monsters, especially demonic generals, were famous for incredible strength. A giant horned monster seemed to loom over them in their thoughts, as these creatures sometimes reached the peak of legendary level, certain death for novices. Realizing there was no retreat, the dark-haired young man suggested simply going to scout the situation, after which the action moved to the teacher's room. The blond man in a blue cloak reproachfully noted that this cruel exam was designed for geniuses, not ordinary students. Instructor Wang calmly sipped her coffee and waved it off. She had already leaked the entire boss strategy on the local forum, so killing him would not be difficult. The woman admitted that she threatened expulsion only to humble the freshmen and prepare them to face real monsters. Far from there, at the very pass, a sea of fire devoured the dead rocky wasteland. A blue spatial transition portal swirled before the boys. Having received the system's automatic permission, the friends confidently took a step into the unknown. Zhou Wen and his partner silently passed by the armed guards, straight into the glowing portal. A step, and the cold walls of the base changed to the endless sands of the Hulao Pass. From the height of the fortress wall, they noticed dark silhouettes aimlessly wandering the dunes. These were exhausted demonic soldiers with rusty, crooked blades in their hands. From beneath heavy helmets, the red eyes of the dead glowed ominously. The young man in the white hoodie leaned casually on the parapet, bored because only ordinary foot soldiers were around. He suggested going deeper to find the general, but Zhou Wen sharply rebuked him, warning not to play with life in unfamiliar territory. He only smiled indulgently, mentally calling his friend too cautious. Throwing his hand in an okay gesture, the boy carefreely moved along the wall to seek adventures alone. Zhou Wen walked through the empty stone courtyard, calculating the patterns of the local dungeons. Suddenly he abruptly froze before a strange pedestal. Right between the fangs of the carved stone beast hid a square plate with the imprint of a human palm. The boy triumphantly pulled out his phone. He had finally found that very hidden mark. Meanwhile, his frivolous partner continued standing on the wall, confidently convincing himself that two mortals could easily scatter these feeble soldiers, and in the worst case, they could always just run away. He told Li Xuan that it was time to return, and he obediently agreed. The boy literally shone with satisfaction, which completely puzzled his partner. Before them towered a gigantic, swirling portal. When asked about his happy expression, he only shrugged indifferently, although inside he was already triumphant over the appearance of a new dungeon. He sat in front of the monitor, pondering the guide found on the forum. Master Wang really did not demand the impossible from them. His gaze caught on the final warning on the screen: avoid special demons with hieroglyphs. He thoughtfully touched his chin, recalling that Li Xuan had already spoken about these creatures. Licking a drop of blood from his finger, the boy decided to check all the clues directly in the game. A flash of the interface, and here he already stands on the top of a high wall, before the endless desert of the Hulao Pass. Without unnecessary hesitation, he jumped down. The heavy landing raised a cloud of sand right before the noses of two horned guards. He only grinned defiantly. A powerful, fiery strike instantly scattered the enemies in all directions. Taking a fighting stance with burning fists, he was even surprised. The famed demonic soldiers fell too easily. He relaxed his shoulders, losing interest in the fight. Suddenly, two giants armed with axes charged at him with a roar. In the darkness, bloody eyes flashed, and a terrifying glowing hieroglyph appeared on the forehead: the very special general appeared. A flash of a long blue blade cut both monsters in half with one move. A mechanical insect with a loud buzzing cut through the sky. The young man with the red scarf tore away from the fortress wall. He flew headlong, breaking through small enemies and blue flashes of energy. Thinking about whether he would meet elite generals here, the boy collided with a monster with a shield. A quick circular strike of fire instantly threw the opponent away. Suddenly, a clawed red paw heavily stepped on the pierced helmet of the slain enemy. The young man sharply braked. Ahead sat a red-skinned demon with a spear. The monster snarled fiercely. The boy remembered what he had read on the phone. The glowing hieroglyph on the helmet meant that before him was the very special demonic general warned about by Teacher Van. With a shout of "Forward!" the young man threw his mechanical insect into the attack. The huge weapon's tip struck the sand with a crash. The general rushed forward, riding a mad, blood-red beast. The mechanical drone barely avoided the powerful shockwave. The demon tightly gripped the spear shaft, ready to tear the enemy apart. A blue energy blade with a crack plunged straight into the redskin's back. A fierce roar sounded, and the space around exploded with columns of hellish flame. The light weapon simply shattered into pieces from the pressure of the aura. The warrior calmly turned in the fire, and only snorted disdainfully, looking at his pathetic wound. In the whirl of flames, a massive trident materialized. The blue-haired youth was stunned. The demon mockingly swung at the flying ant, throwing it a daring challenge. Like a fiery comet, he rushed forward, flying straight into the enemy. The monster jumped high into the sky, and the youth could not believe that the warrior was going to jump after him such a distance. A predatory smile, mocking buzzing, and the ant was suddenly squeezed inside a dark gravitational sphere. One devastating swing of the burning spear tore the trap along with the victim to pieces. The youth stared at the screen in shock, breaking out in a cold sweat at how easily an unknown skill turned the monster to dust. Suddenly he sharply turned around and caught his halberd, preparing to repel a sudden threat from the sky. Fingers trembled nervously on the tablet, but fear instantly changed to excitement. The terrible power of this creature ignited in him a wild desire to conquer it at any cost. The demonic general crushed the flying ant with one blow, ignoring its legendary speed. The young man thoughtfully rubbed his chin. This special boss had already reached the peak of its development. A light of revival flashed on the fortress wall, returning his avatar to the game. With a wild look, the hero rushed into a new attack. A red trail cut through the air over the desert. Ahead, two gray-horned guards froze. Hiding behind a rock, the player noticed the disappearance of the main enemy, when suddenly, a blue energy arc sliced through the space. The avatar barely managed to dodge the blow that shattered the stone into pieces. Sand was thrown up from the sudden breaking. The boy looked at the phone disappointedly. This time only ordinary mobs without hieroglyphs on their helmets were generated. His character instantly summoned a giant red wasp for help. The screen flashed blue stripes for a moment. The young man leaned back in the chair, frantically clicking commands. However, the guardian with one sweep of his spear tore the just summoned monster to pieces. He slowly moved away, pondering the crazy difference in strength between ordinary and legendary demon generals. Suddenly he froze. Right in front of him hovered a crystal of spiritual power of the 15th level, but the boy only sighed. His stats had already reached the limit, so the cool find would not have changed anything. Leaving the slain monster, he ran further into the now free desert. Soon, massive walls of an ancient fortress rose ahead. Approaching the gates, he assumed that this was the very Hulao Pass. Suddenly a flash blazed lightning fast above the roof. A luminous arrow pierced the avatar's chest, through and through. In reality, the boy even dropped the phone, shouting in outrage, while his character was heading to respawn. He never spotted the secret shooter, so after rebirth, he decided to go straight through and break inside at maximum speed. Unfolding his shining wings, he dashed to the gate like a blue lightning bolt. Flash! A merciless shot instantly knocked him down in midair again. The boy stared ahead in shock. Even the signature flash of silver wings couldn't bypass this defense. Sighing heavily, he sat down at the computer to look for clues about this hellish frontier on gaming forums. His fingers quickly summoned the mouse, scanning dozens of threads. He rested his head on his hand in disappointment. There was plenty of chatter on the forum, but almost no truly useful hints. The gates of the ancient fortress had once not been overcome, even by an epic-level team, so the 2.5-kilometer radius around the pass was tightly closed to everyone. Leaning back in his chair, the boy realized there was no data on special demonic generals, so he would have to rely only on himself. Suddenly, a quiet system chime sounded. On his lap, with a loud squeak, a small glowing creature unexpectedly appeared. He calmly scratched the little one, reminding himself that it was time to feed him and the silver-winged ant. Before clearing the next dungeon, he decided to get provisions for the trainees in that ancient imperial city. The little beast instantly snapped its teeth and bit him right on the finger until it bled. A frantic scream of pain echoed through the house, and the girl on the stairs only sighed heavily. Her neighbor was causing some kind of trouble again. The fog thickly spread over the dangerous gorges of the Hulao Pass. A fierce battle broke out. The girl threw a water bomb, and the young man in front sharply stopped the attack with a massive freeze. Sharp, icy spikes burst from the ground, tightly pinning the horned demon with a spear. The monster roared furiously, flashing red eyes through the shards of ice. Meanwhile, the stern mentor in glasses watched from the city wall. Several days had passed, and the rest of the students trained relentlessly. Only all this bloody fighting was happening on the screen of the boy's smartphone, who was lying relaxed on the bed. A bright purple explosion suddenly flashed on the display. From the virtual smoke finally flew out the desired loot, a crystal of spiritual power. The young man sighed disappointedly. He did not expect such a low drop chance, since before that, he had only gotten weak eggs with companion pets. He casually pressed the absorb button, and at that very moment, the game magic burst into reality. The boy's body was enveloped in a pulsating red aura. Under the skin on his chest, the heated veins flared feverishly. He calmly listened to the sensations. The absorption went without strong discomfort, probably because his physical stats had already reached 11 points. A system hologram hovered right above the bed. The skill, Buddha's Lotus Flesh, was successfully upgraded to level 9. The boy sat on the bed in front of the phone, pondering whether Buddha's Lotus Flesh really worked as a defense. He tightly clenched the smartphone. He needed to check. The boy abruptly stood up, and his body was instantly enveloped by a shining crimson dome in the shape of a lotus. But in a moment he grimaced. The skill was burning spiritual energy at a crazy speed. The dome burst, and the exhausted player heavily dropped to one knee. Looking at the sparks on his palm, he realized that such armor couldn't be maintained for long. Only one thing remained: to test the shield's durability directly in the game. Digital transition. On the gaming wasteland, his avatar barely managed to unfold the lotus, repelling heavy blows from two demons with maces. With a short exclamation, he rushed into a counterattack, releasing a crimson wave. The energy crackled as it scattered the enemy. The shield cracked, and the boy guessed that a real demonic general would have shattered such protection instantly. He had just decided to test the dome against arrows when a powerful blue beam pierced through both the barrier and his avatar's chest. In reality, the boy only sighed resignedly, watching the fading sphere. He was killed with a single hit. The youth tensed and froze, realizing that for these arrows, his legendary shield was just thin paper. The sky above the gate was cut by red flashes, and he decided to stay far away from the shooter of such a terrible level. Suddenly, a radiant winged figure hovered in the air. It was a special, demonic general. The horned enemy grinned fiercely, showing superiority over his predecessor with his entire appearance. Meanwhile, someone reported via communication about the arrival of Sion at the university. The captain sat relaxed among the holograms, and without hesitation, gave the start to the arrest operation. He ordered to seize Zhou Wen swiftly, so that the influential An family would suspect nothing. The red-haired agent accepted the order and decisively opened the rector's office door. The nervous tapping of fingers on the table broke the silence of the office. The gray-haired rector raised his gaze to the uninvited guests and directly asked what the student had done if the special inspection itself had come for him. The red-haired agent coldly assured that the boy was not in any danger, and they just wanted to ask a few questions. But the old man knew perfectly well the dreadful reputation of her agency, and cut in. If he handed over Zhou Wen to them, he would never return intact. The woman squinted displeased, realizing that the rector would not yield voluntarily. Document, she sharply threw to her sullen subordinate. A folder with a massive metal emblem fell onto the glass table with a dull clatter. The agent leaned forward, knowing that the old man would definitely recognize this sign. The agent pressed coldly, whether the university was really ready to go against the law. Cold sweat appeared on the rector's forehead as soon as he read the headline: an inter-regional arrest warrant. He grimly clenched his teeth, realizing that a paper of such an incredible level was obtained for an ordinary student. Meanwhile, the sun peacefully shone over the quiet student town, and the culprit of the commotion, Zhou Wen, sat indifferently on the bed and frantically tapped on the smartphone screen. In the virtual world, his avatar with two blades was in a furious leap, cutting the enemy with a solid wall of fire. In a sharp leap, the young man unleashed a shining arc strike on the enemy. The general only snarled maliciously and clenched the energy blade with bare hands. The collision tore space with a powerful flash of blue and crimson power. The boy quickly jumped back, accumulating energy in his fist mid-air. In response, the general's hand filled with a dark aura. A swing of the weapon, and a giant bloody pillar split the ground. A destructive wave swept away everything in its path, forcing the young man to sharply dodge. A sudden blue flash of the system. The vision of the battle dissipated, and the boy thoughtfully rubbed his chin. This general knew how to turn his hand into a blade, which meant his abilities were fundamentally different. Sitting on the bed, he pieced together a puzzle from the marks on enemy helmets. There were already knife and paper, so next to expect was rock. There was no effective tactic against paper, but he planned to save himself from cutting strikes with a flash of silver wings. The young man leaned back on the pillows, finally deciding that in the next fight he would split from his protege to attack together and force the general to open up for a strike. Moreover, during the fusion, his battle ant simply could not use the magical light needle. Suddenly, a loud knock on the door shattered the silence. The boy froze in confusion, not understanding who could have come at such a late hour. A hand decisively pressed the door handle. The guard in uniform silently pulled his cap down over Zhou Wen. The guard briefly ordered him to follow, and the surprised young man asked again if he was really being summoned to the rector's office. The two of them headed away through the sunlit courtyard. Through the frosted glass, a female silhouette silently watched their departure. The girl touched her chin in confusion, wondering why the young man was suddenly being led somewhere. The dazzling sun flooded the high-rises of the quiet student town. The blue-haired young man walked slowly down the alley, following the silent escort in uniform. He frowned. There were suspiciously few people around. The footsteps abruptly stopped. The boy stopped and directly told his companion that this road did not lead to the rector's office at all, but to the exit from the campus. "How observant you are," an unfamiliar voice sounded. The young man flinched in surprise when a black heel struck right in front of him. A red-haired woman forcefully delivered a devastating knee strike to his stomach. Blood spurted from his mouth. He sank heavily, leaning on the asphalt with a trembling hand. The woman loftily towered over the fallen boy, coldly greeting him on their new encounter. Her eyes flashed dangerously. She promised to extract from him absolutely everything he knew about Jing Daoxiang. Holding his stomach, the young man mentally cursed the old man because of whom he got into trouble, and indignantly demanded some evidence for the arrest. The woman was stunned inwardly that an ordinary mortal could stand up after her blow, but sharply cut off aloud. The evidence would come only after the detention. The red-haired woman sharply gave the order, and the sullen giant in uniform moved forward. The young man tensed, asking about the consequences of resistance, while a foreign gloved hand was already reaching for him. In response, the girl formed a blade of purple energy and cold-bloodedly promised to cut off his limbs if he did not surrender. Instead of fear, he only smiled defiantly. At that very moment, a pillar of blue aura in the shape of a demonic face burst from him, forcing the attacker to recoil. A heavy fist sliced through the void. The boy simply disappeared. Realizing that the fugitive used a spiritual power skill, the girl irritably ordered an immediate sweep of the area. Her eyes flashed dangerously. The chase instantly rushed after into the dense forest. Meanwhile, the fugitive himself was rushing through the fog, gathering his thoughts together. He skillfully jumped over the branches. The pursuer was sure that he was an accomplice of Jin Daoxiang, and no excuses would work here. The worst part was that he really received the lost sutra of immortality from him. So after the arrest, the verdict would be fabricated instantly. A sudden blow interrupted the thought. A purple energy beam pierced the leaves and knocked him down mid-air. A giant green hand almost grabbed him in the air. The pursuers caught up too quickly. He clenched his teeth irritably. With a sharp strike, the boy cut through the energy paw and tore off the shredded clothes, realizing that this could not continue. Behind, two legendary-level fighters were rapidly approaching, for whom his capture was only a matter of time. While running, he glanced at the smartphone screen. There glowed the login button to the underground city of Buddha, his only chance to shake off this pair from his tail. Deep in the icy vaults of the underground city of Buddha, the red-haired girl and the guard rushed through the tunnel after the half-naked fugitive with blue hair. She fiercely attacked her subordinate for unverified documents. If the An family finds out everything, they will lose everything. Breaking into a run, the girl released a hail of pink energy spears straight into the boy's back. The fugitive miraculously dodged, rolling on the ground as the blade screeched into the surrounding stone. A sharp turn and a tense look. A powerful pillar of blue energy completely destroyed the enemy attack. The boy hovered in the air on glowing wings, causing the girl to freeze in shock. She recognized this legendary level ability. However, he immediately fell to one knee, bleeding from exhaustion. A heavy, painful exhale. Directly ahead, the path to the stairs was blocked by a massive metal block. The pursuers were breathing down his neck, so the boy rushed straight at the obstacle. Wrapping his body in the aura of bloody zen, he lightly jumped over the barricade. "You won't escape," shouted the red-haired woman, desperately throwing another volley of blades after him. The blue-haired youth rushed up the stone stairs, dodging deadly violet beams. He clenched his teeth, and with a desperate scream, dived under the next volley. His strength betrayed him, and the boy ran headlong into the hard stairs. Somewhere below, in front of the massive armored doors with a forbidden sign, a pair of strangers stopped. The red-haired woman confidently stated that since some schoolboys slipped through there was nothing to fear. She decisively stepped upward, leading a silent companion in a cap behind her. Seeing the exhausted boy on the stairs, the woman stopped and arrogantly asked why he was sitting down. The youth lifted his bloodied face and wearily asked if they were not afraid to die if they took even one more step. The woman irritably told her partner not to be a coward, while the boy aimed at the man with his fingers, as if with a pistol. Bang! A powerful invisible shot instantly knocked the attacker off his feet. The body heavily thudded onto the stone floor. The woman froze in shock over her partner. She touched his back and realized with horror he was dead. Her face twisted with rage, and she screamed wildly. "What did you do to him?" The beaten blue-haired youth snapped irritably at the new opponent, but suddenly stopped in surprise. She calmly crossed the dangerous boundary. At that moment, a cross flared on the stranger's forehead, and everything around exploded with blinding light. Behind her, a colossal golden figure of an angel spread its wings. The woman calmly looked back, dryly noting that now she perfectly understood why he sought refuge in this strange place. In the semi-dark cave, a blinding light flared. Above the red-haired woman, a golden angel spread 6 wings. Zhou Wen stared in shock at the glowing headless figure. According to legend, this creature from the western sector had weak basic attacks, but possessed one deadly technique. The woman materialized 2 crimson swords and coldly ordered surrender, while the boy realized the bitter truth. This beast guardian granted her full immunity to curses. She suddenly lunged forward, making Zhou Wen curse. From her strike, a forest of sharp crystalline spikes burst from the ground. Zhou Wen rushed to flee past the giant crimson monster, hoping to lure the enemy into the Buddha Hall as his last chance. New energy spears exploded right under the feet of the fugitive. A deadly cross of red energy flew into his back. The boy clenched his teeth and tensely looked back. A powerful blow shattered the stone wall to pieces, raising a thick cloud of dust. The red-haired woman slowly emerged from the dust, disdainfully calling him a pathetic mortal. The path was blocked by the same crimson monster, but the woman cold-bloodedly unleashed a storm of energy blades on it. The cross on her forehead flashed fiercely as she asked if the creature was really ready to fight a higher legendary rank. The red blade, with a ringing sound, plunged into the floor right in front of the Buddha statue. Nearby lay a sprawled boy, groaning dully from pain in his shattered chest. In the doorway stood the red-haired swordswoman, and coldly cut off that he had nowhere to run. Bleeding out, he grimaced crookedly and advised her to say goodbye to her leg. The woman sharply stepped forward. At that very moment, the golden mark on her forehead cracked. The eyes of the stone Buddha suddenly flashed with a piercing blue. A devastating blow from above shattered the floor to pieces. The swordswoman was harshly slammed into the stone under the terrifying gaze of the deity. The boy laughed, sat down among the debris, and gratefully showed Buddha a thumbs up. Clenching a bloody wound, he barely got to his feet. The enemy was barely alive. It was a perfect chance, so he immediately summoned his energetic spirit insect for the finishing blow. The red silhouette dashed like lightning toward the target. The bloodied woman fiercely clenched her teeth, preparing to face the inevitable attack. A crimson energy whirlwind, in the shape of a beast, collided in a fierce strike with a blue blade. From the collision, a destructive wave ricocheted far into the sky. In the shattered room, the wounded young man clutched his bloodied chest. He was furious that the girl had managed to escape. Meanwhile, giant skyscrapers calmly towered over the city. A woman's palm, smeared with blood, fell heavily on the concrete wall. Exhausted Li Si barely stood on her feet, mentally swearing to put Zhou Wen behind bars for attacking an officer, even if the powerful An family defended him. A metallic click made her freeze in horror. Suddenly a pistol was pressed to her temple. An elegant man with a monocle did not hide his weapon and slyly asked what would happen if the An family really showed up. Lisa raised her eyes and turned cold. Right in front of her stood An Tianzuo himself.